There are moments in history when we can't help but wonder if what we call myths were ever just metaphors. When fragments of ancient scrolls were uncovered in the caves of Qumran, among them a long-forgotten text, the Book of Enoch, people began to realize that humanity's past might not be as simple as we've been taught. That text tells of the Watchers, angels sent down to earth who eventually fell, crossing paths with humans and giving rise to a race of giants known as the Nephilim. At first it sounds like mythology, yet what feels uncanny is how many civilizations, from Sumer and Egypt to Greece and even Ireland, preserved echoes of gods descending from the sky, of giants walking the land, and of a great flood that erased almost everything. Was Enoch merely a religious figure, or a witness to an age our minds can barely comprehend? Could it be that human history has been rewritten, and the most unsettling truths were pushed into the shadows of memory? This is the journey into forbidden fragments and silenced stories, the voices that never made it into textbooks but still resonate across time. Welcome to Deformed History. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right, and let me know in the comments where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now. I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. When we speak of beginnings, we often imagine them as bright dawns, clear lines in the sand where one age ends and another begins. But history rarely moves in such clean strokes. The story of the Book of Enoch begins not in the glittering courts of kings, but in a barren stretch of desert in 1946. Near a place called Qumran on the West Bank. Picture a group of teenage shepherds, bored under the relentless sun, tossing stones into the mouth of a cave. The hollow crash of pottery breaking answers their laughter, and curiosity leads them inside. What they stumble upon is not treasure in gold or jewels, but jars of clay holding brittle fragments of texts that had slept undisturbed for nearly 2,000 years. No one in that moment could grasp the weight of their discovery, yet it would ripple through archaeology, theology, and even the way we question human memory itself. Those scrolls, now known collectively as the Dead Sea Scrolls, contained hundreds of manuscripts. Among the hymns, rules, and prayers, one text stood apart, as if it were whispering from another reality entirely. It was the Book of Enoch, a work long thought lost, remembered only through faint echoes in early Christian writings. Unlike the canonical books, it did not speak in the carefully measured voice of doctrine. Instead, it told of things half erased, half buried. Angels who broke their vows, giants who walked among men, floods that swept the earth clean. In its pages, the world of Genesis, the familiar tale of Noah and the ark, suddenly tilted into stranger territory, suggesting that what we thought we knew was merely a sliver of a much larger, darker picture. Enoch himself is an elusive figure. In the book of Genesis, he is mentioned almost in passing, a patriarch who walked with God and was no more because God took him. Just a few lines, barely a shadow on the page. But in the Book of Enoch, this shadow stretches into an entire cosmos. Here, Enoch is not a forgotten ancestor, but a chosen mediator, lifted into the heavens to converse with beings of immense power. He sees the rivers of fire, the edges of the earth, the wheels of the stars turning in their courses. He learns secrets not meant for mortal ears, secrets of time, of destiny, of the forces that underlie creation itself. For centuries, this portrayal unsettled the guardians of orthodoxy. Was this the voice of inspiration or of rebellion? Was Enoch revealing divine mysteries or blaspheming by pulling back the curtain too far? At the center of his visions stand the Watchers. Their very name suggests vigilance, but also distance. They were the ones who were meant to observe, not to interfere. According to the text, they descended upon Mount Hermon, a peak sacred to ancient peoples from the Canaanites to the later Greeks. At first, their task was to guide and oversee, a celestial guard posted to the frontier between heaven and earth. But as the story unfolds, their watchfulness curdles into desire. Drawn to the daughters of men, they cross the forbidden line, taking wives and fathering offspring. The result is the Nephilim, a word that in Hebrew can mean the fallen ones, though the text describes them in brutal clarity, giants of savage strength who devour both the fruits of the land and the flesh of men. To the modern ear, this might sound like pure legend, a tale spun to explain ruins or to frighten children. Yet what lends it weight is how often variations of the same theme emerge across cultures that supposedly had no contact. The Irish tell of Finn McCool building a stone causeway to stride across the sea. The Greeks speak of the Gigantes, born from the earth, who challenged the Olympian gods. The Babylonians etched on their tablets stories of beings who descended from the heavens, imparting knowledge both wondrous and dangerous. Even Marco Polo, writing in the Middle Ages, claimed to have heard of giants in Zanzibar so powerful they could carry the loads of 4 men. Are these scattered myths or scattered memories, fragments of an ancient reality too strange to fit neatly into the histories we accept? The Book of Enoch does not shy from the consequences. The union of Watchers and humans is not celebrated but condemned. Their hybrid children, enormous and insatiable, tear at the order of creation. And so judgment falls, not only upon the Nephilim, who were swept away in the flood, but upon the Watchers themselves, bound and imprisoned in the depths of the earth. In this drama, Enoch becomes the messenger, the reluctant intermediary who pleads with the divine on behalf of the fallen, even as he witnesses their doom. The imagery is vivid. Chains of fire, caverns deep beneath mountains, the cries of angels cast down from their place of light. These are not the serene parables of Sunday lessons. They are darker, rawer, closer to the nightmares that slip into the edges of sleep. Why, then, was such a book banished? The answer is tangled in the long struggle of the early church to define itself. In the centuries after the death of Jesus, countless texts circulated. Gospels attributed to disciples, letters, visions, revelations. To bind a movement together, leaders sought unity, and unity required boundaries. Some texts were chosen, others discarded. The Book of Enoch, with its giants and its cosmic rebellions, did not fit the emerging picture of a faith focused on salvation through Christ. It raised too many questions, unsettled too many assumptions. And so, though it was cherished by communities in Ethiopia and quoted by early writers like the author of the Epistle of Jude, it was gradually pushed aside until it became an almost forgotten whisper. And yet it never quite disappeared. Fragments survived in Greek, in Aramaic, in Ge'ez. Echoes surfaced in rabbinic tales, in mystical traditions, even in Islamic lore where Enoch is remembered as Idris, the sage. Again and again, across cultures, the figure returns under different names. Hermes Trismegistus in Hellenistic Egypt, Thoth the scribe of the gods, Saurid the builder of pyramids. It is as if humanity, unwilling to let go of this shadowy ancestor, kept reinventing him to suit its needs, preserving the idea of a man who had walked with the divine and returned with forbidden knowledge. Standing at the threshold of this story, we must ask ourselves, what if Enoch is not merely legend? What if behind the myths of watchers and giants lies an account of encounters with something beyond human? Ancient people may not have had the vocabulary of science, but they had their own language of symbols. And sometimes symbols point to realities we no longer recognize. Perhaps the flood remembered in so many traditions was not just a moral fable, but a memory of actual catastrophe at the end of the Ice Age. Perhaps the giants are echoes of a time when the boundaries of humanity were not as fixed as we assume. Or perhaps they are metaphors that became mistaken for history, stories that grew flesh over centuries of retelling. In any case, the Book of Enoch invites us into a world where the line between myth and memory blurs. It dares us to imagine that the official history, written by victors and priests, is only one layer of the past. Beneath it lies another history, fragmentary, unsettling, and perhaps closer to the truth of what humanity once experienced. And it is here, in the shadowed corridors of these forgotten scrolls, that our journey truly begins. If the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the desert of Qumran was the accidental doorway into this hidden past, then the Book of Enoch is the corridor that pulls us deeper, step by step, into a reality that feels both alien and familiar. It is not merely the story of one man's visions, but the tale of a cosmic rebellion, a fracture between realms, and a warning of consequences that echo through ages. To walk into Enoch's world is to enter a theater where the stage is not limited to earth, but stretches across heaven, the underworld, and everything in between. And yet, strangely, the drama he describes mirrors anxieties that humanity still carries: the fear of corrupted knowledge, the danger of desire unchecked, and the memory of disasters that can wipe out entire civilizations in a single sweep. Enoch tells us of the Watchers, those radiant beings who descend upon Mount Hermon. To the cultures of the Levant, that mountain was no ordinary landmark. It was a sacred peak, shrouded in snow, a place where gods were said to gather. The very name Hermon is linked to the idea of a vow, a covenant, and in Enoch's telling, it becomes the site of the Watchers' pact. 200 of them swear an oath together. If one should take a human woman, then all would join him, so none would bear the blame alone. This detail, an oath carved into eternity, suggests that the descent of the Watchers was not an accident, not the whim of a few, but a deliberate rebellion, a collective choice to cross the line set between the divine and the mortal. And from that choice came offspring, unlike anything the world had known. The Nephilim are described not simply as tall or strong, but as vast, voracious, consuming the labors of humanity until nothing was left. The text says they turned to devouring flesh when crops no longer satisfied their hunger. And in that image we sense the nightmare of beings who walk with human shape, yet carry appetites far beyond human measure. Were these beings literal giants, their bones buried and forgotten? Or were they metaphors for oppressive rulers, kings who towered in power and crushed the people beneath them? The ambiguity is deliberate, And it is precisely this uncertainty that makes the Book of Enoch so haunting. Across the Mediterranean, stories arise that seem to rhyme with Enoch's tale. The Greeks remembered the Titans, immense beings who waged war against the Olympians, only to be chained in Tartarus, the shadowy prison beneath the earth. In Ireland, the legend of the Giant's Causeway speaks of a colossal warrior shaping the land itself with his footsteps. In Mesopotamia, the Anunnaki descended from the heavens to impart wisdom, but their gifts carried the weight of domination. How can cultures so distant echo each other in motifs so precise? Perhaps human imagination is drawn to similar archetypes, or perhaps these are fractured recollections of the same primeval events, scattered across languages and ages. The Book of Enoch, though ancient, reads at times like a modern science fiction epic. Enoch is taken up into the sky, not in metaphor, but in descriptions that feel eerily tangible. He speaks of a chariot of fire, of being lifted above the earth, seeing rivers that gleam like molten metal, mountains whose peaks touch the stars. In a time when humans had no concept of spaceflight, no vocabulary for machines, the only language available was that of fire, wheels, and wings. Could these visions have been encounters with something real, refracted through the lens of a Bronze Age mind? Or were they symbolic journeys inward, explorations of the hidden landscapes of the soul? Whatever their origin, the visions of Enoch left their mark. He describes the punishment of the watchers, bound hand and foot, cast into caverns of darkness, awaiting the final judgment. The imagery is stark and unrelenting. Chains of burning metal, pits dug deep beneath the mountains, the endless passage of time gnawing at their exile. It is here we find a curious parallel with later theology. The fallen angels of Christian tradition, the demons bound in hell, seem to trace their lineage back to these watchers. Even the idea of hell as a place of imprisonment beneath the earth may have drawn from these descriptions. In other words, Enoch is not an isolated text, but a hidden root, feeding into stories that still shape millions of beliefs today. Yet for all its cosmic scope, the Book of Enoch also carries a strangely intimate tone. Enoch himself is not portrayed as a distant prophet, but as a man bewildered by the enormity of what he sees. He is a father, a grandfather, a figure pulled from the ordinary into the extraordinary. He pleads with God on behalf of the watchers, showing compassion even for those condemned. He asks questions, records answers, tries to bridge the abyss between the heavenly decrees and the human condition. In his uncertainty, we recognize ourselves, the human impulse to understand forces larger than us, to find meaning in the chaos of flood and fire. Consider the flood that looms over Enoch's narrative. It is not unique to Hebrew tradition. It appears in Sumerian epics, in Babylonian tablets, in Native American legends, in stories from India and China. Almost every culture remembers a time when waters rose and reset the world. Archaeologists point to the end of the Ice Age, when melting glaciers caused catastrophic floods across continents. To ancient eyes, such an event could only be explained as judgment, as the hand of the divine sweeping the board clean. The Book of Enoch situates this flood as the direct result of the Watcher's corruption, a cosmic cause behind geological effect. In this blending of myth and memory, we glimpse the way ancient texts preserve fragments of real history beneath the layers of story. But why does it matter today? Why should a text left out of the Bible, a text ignored by councils and bishops centuries ago, still demand our attention. Perhaps because it unsettles us. It suggests that the official story of humanity is incomplete. It whispers that there were others here before us, that our ancestors were not alone, that knowledge was given or stolen from beings beyond our comprehension. It dares us to entertain the possibility that myths are not mere imagination, but coded records of encounters our rational minds prefer to dismiss. And in that challenge, it forces us to look again at what we call history, to question who wrote it and why. As the shepherd boys of Qumran could not have known, the stones they tossed that day broke more than pottery. They shattered the illusion that our past is neatly contained within the pages of accepted scripture. Through the crack they opened, light spills onto forgotten manuscripts, onto voices that had been silenced, onto questions that will not go away. And as we follow Enoch through his visions, through the rise and fall of the Watchers, through floods and flames, we are drawn into the possibility that human history is far stranger, far older, and far more entangled with the unknown than we have ever dared to believe. To truly sense the weight of the Book of Enoch, one must imagine how it felt to live in a world where the boundaries between divine and mortal were not abstract, but immediate, almost tangible. Picture a night in the ancient Near East, where the stars were not distant suns to be measured by telescopes, but living fires, each one a messenger or a sign. To gaze upward was to feel that the heavens themselves were watching, that somewhere beyond the glitter of constellations lurked powers whose intentions were not always kind. It is in this atmosphere that the Watchers descend, luminous strangers on a mountain peak, beings whose presence collapses the distance between earth and sky. Mount Hermon, where Enoch places their descent, was already layered with sacred meaning long before his visions were recorded. Later, cultures would build shrines there to Zeus, to Helios, even to Pan, as if the mountain itself were a threshold to other realms. But in the Book of Enoch, it becomes the site of a contract, a rebellion against the heavenly order. The Watchers swear their oath in unison, a ritual binding them together, and then they act. They cross into human lives, not only by taking wives, but by teaching forbidden knowledge. This detail is crucial, for it suggests that the trespass was not only physical, but intellectual. The Watchers bring with them arts and sciences, sorcery, metallurgy, cosmetics, astrology. Knowledge that alters the way humans live, making them both powerful and vulnerable. To the people of antiquity, knowledge was never neutral. It was gift and curse, light and shadow entwined. When a scribe learned the cycles of the stars, he did not separate astronomy from prophecy. The heavens revealed not only patterns of time, but messages of destiny. When a craftsman forged metal, the blade he shaped was not only a tool, but a potential weapon, an object charged with the possibility of violence. And when women painted their faces with colors drawn from the earth, it was not simply decoration, but a transformation of appearance, a play with identity and desire. In Enoch's telling, the Watchers disrupt the balance by offering these arts without restraint, and humanity, unprepared, is swept into excess. The result is a world spiraling into corruption, where giants devour what little remains, and the cries of the oppressed reach the ears of heaven. The punishment, when it comes, is severe. God commands the archangels, Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, to act. The watchers are cast down, shackled in darkness until the day of judgment. Their monstrous offspring, the Nephilim, are destroyed, their spirits condemned to wander the earth as malevolent beings, perhaps the origin of what later traditions would call demons. Here again, we see how Enoch's visions bleed into the foundations of later religious thought. The idea that restless spirits of giants became demons offers a bridge between myth and theology, explaining the unseen forces that cause sickness, madness, or misfortune. It is a logic of continuity. What began as fleshly beings becomes disembodied but enduring, shadows haunting the corridors of human life. And what of Enoch himself? Unlike Noah, whose story centers on survival, Enoch's role is mediation. He is taken up into the heavens, shown the machinery of the cosmos, instructed in secrets that no other mortal has glimpsed. He learns the courses of the stars, the laws that bind creation, the mysteries of lightning and thunder. To a modern ear, these passages are startling, for they sometimes sound less like religious allegory and more like fragments of scientific observation cloaked in ancient language. Could these descriptions be attempts to articulate natural forces, electricity, magnetism, cosmic cycles, that were dimly grasped by early peoples? Or are they symbolic, metaphors for inner illumination, for the awakening of consciousness itself? What unsettles most is not the content alone, but the insistence of the text that these are not metaphors. Enoch repeatedly affirms his own authorship, declaring dates, places, circumstances, as if he feared that future readers would dismiss his words as fantasy. In the 165th year, on the first day of the first month, I was in my house alone when two men appeared to me, their appearance unlike any on earth. It is a statement that resists being read as myth. He is saying, in effect, this happened. And whether one believes him or not, the boldness of the claim forces us to confront the possibility that some ancient experiences cannot be neatly categorized as legend or hallucination. Perhaps this is why the Book of Enoch provokes unease. It does not sit comfortably within the boundaries of accepted scripture, nor does it dissolve easily into metaphor. It insists on its own reality, demanding that we either accept or reject it outright. For the early church, this was too dangerous. To leave it in the canon was to risk fragmenting the unity of belief, to open the door to interpretations that might destabilize authority. Better to exclude it, to let it fade into obscurity. Yet its survival in Ethiopia, where it was preserved as part of the sacred tradition, suggests that not all communities were willing to silence its voice. Beyond the theological debates, there is the haunting question of parallels. The Sumerians told of the Anunnaki, those who descended from the heavens, who mingled with humanity and brought knowledge. Their tales include floods, hybrid beings, divine judgments that resemble the themes of Enoch. Could it be that what we see here is not isolated invention, but the retelling of a much older story, reshaped to fit each culture's language and symbols? If so, then Enoch's visions may be part of a deep current running through human memory, a current that surfaces in myths, legends, and sacred texts across continents. The flood, the giants, the descent of divine beings, all these motifs recur with a persistence that begs explanation. Were they simply archetypes born of the human imagination, or records of events so profound that they could not be forgotten, even as they were transformed into story? Modern archaeology reveals evidence of massive floods at the end of the Ice Age, around 10,000 years ago, when rising seas swallowed coastlines and reshaped landscapes. To those who survived, it must have seemed as if the entire world had drowned. How could such memories not leave imprints on culture after culture, encoded in myths that outlived empires? And so we return to the figure of Enoch, standing at the crossroads of myth and memory. His visions challenge us because they refuse to fit into tidy categories. They are too mythic to be history, too insistent to be mere myth. They are fragments from a forgotten realm where angels walk among men and knowledge burns with both brilliance and peril. As we listen to his voice across the centuries, we are invited not to accept blindly, nor to dismiss cynically, but to dwell in the possibility that human history is stranger, more entangled with the unknown than our textbooks allow. To follow the trail of Enoch is to step into a world where history and myth overlap like layers of translucent parchment, each revealing just enough to make us question the layer beneath. His visions do not unfold in isolation. They are part of a wider tapestry in which humanity's oldest fears and hopes are encoded. One of the most compelling threads is the way knowledge itself is portrayed. In Enoch's telling, the Watchers did more than descend to earth and take wives. They became teachers, revealing arts and sciences to those not ready for them. Azazel, one of their leaders, is said to have taught men how to make weapons of war and women how to adorn themselves with cosmetics. Other Watchers taught sorcery, enchantments, the reading of signs in the stars. Knowledge, in this context, is dangerous because it is premature, like fire placed in unsteady hands. It grants power, but it corrodes balance. If this story feels strangely familiar, it is because the motif recurs across cultures. In Greek mythology, Prometheus steals fire from the gods to give to humans, an act both celebrated and punished. In Mesopotamian tradition, the Apkallu, half-divine sages, teach humanity wisdom before the flood. In the biblical account of Eden, the serpent offers Adam and Eve the fruit of the tree of knowledge, opening their eyes, but also casting them into exile. Everywhere, the theme emerges: knowledge as a gift that transforms but also destroys, wisdom that liberates but carries a price. Perhaps what unsettled early theologians about the Book of Enoch was not simply its fantastical imagery, but its subversive suggestion that the divine itself could be divided, that beings from heaven might act against the will of God by granting forbidden truths. Enoch's text lingers on the consequences. Once knowledge spreads, there is no containing it. Metallurgy leads to weapons, which lead to bloodshed. Sorcery blurs the line between natural and supernatural, destabilizing communities. Adornment feeds vanity and desire, setting in motion rivalries and lusts. The world becomes violent, corrupted, weighted down by what it cannot control, and into this maelstrom are born the Nephilim, towering offspring whose appetites dwarf those of ordinary men. The image is grotesque. Giants striding across fields, stripping them bare, turning against their human kin in hunger. The cries of the earth rise up, and the heavens answer with judgment. Yet within the darkness, Enoch's role glimmers as something different. Unlike Noah, who will later embody survival through obedience, Enoch is caught in the position of intercessor. The Watchers, realizing the depth of their punishment, beg him to plead for them. They ask him to write petitions to God, to intercede on their behalf. In a haunting passage, Enoch describes how he carries their pleas upward, only to be told that mercy will not be granted. The watchers will remain imprisoned until the final day, their fate sealed by their own rebellion. It is a chilling reminder of how choices ripple outward, binding even angels in chains of consequence. But the visions do not stop at punishment. Enoch is taken further, into realms beyond the reach of ordinary eyes. He sees the storehouses of the winds, the chambers of hail and snow, the pathways of the sun and moon. To an ancient listener, these were not abstract descriptions, but revelations of how the cosmos itself was ordered. They implied that behind the chaos of weather and season lay a structure, a hidden architecture. Today we might call it science. Then it was mystery, unveiled only to one initiated. And here lies another unsettling thought, that Enoch, in his archaic language, may have preserved glimpses of truths about the natural world, encoded in metaphor but pointing to realities we can still recognize. Consider his description of lightning as a force stored in heavenly vaults, released at command, or his account of stars bound in courses, unable to deviate from their appointed paths. While the vocabulary is ancient, the intuition is modern. Energy as a force that can be stored and unleashed, celestial bodies moving according to unseen laws. It may be coincidence, or it may be evidence that even in antiquity, certain minds glimpsed patterns we now articulate with physics. To some, this is evidence of divine revelation. To others, it suggests encounters with advanced knowledge, perhaps even advanced beings, recast in the only terms available to the ancients. And this brings us back to the larger question. What exactly is the Book of Enoch? Is it myth, scripture, allegory, or memory? The fact that it straddles all categories is precisely what makes it powerful. If it were mere fantasy, it would not echo so strongly in traditions across continents. If it were strict theology, it would not have been excluded from the canon. Its persistence hints that it occupies a liminal space, too unsettling to accept, too potent to forget. This liminality is what makes it feel alive even now, as though the text itself resists closure. It is also worth noting how consistently Enoch's figure reappears across cultures under other names. In Egyptian lore, he is Thoth, the scribe of the gods, inventor of writing, guardian of hidden wisdom. In Hellenistic traditions, he becomes Hermes Trismegistus, master of alchemy and the mysteries of the stars. In Islamic thought, he is Idris, the sage who foresaw the flood. These are not identical portraits, but they share a resonance. Enoch as the keeper of knowledge, the mediator between heaven and earth, the one who saw what others could not. When the same archetype appears in culture after culture, it suggests that beneath the shifting names lies a figure too central to erase. Perhaps this is why later mystics and esoteric traditions returned to Enoch with fascination. The Kabbalists saw him as Metatron, the angel who stands beside God's throne. Renaissance magicians cited him as a source of secret wisdom. Even modern occultists, in their attempts to channel Enochian magic, claimed to tap into the language of angels said to have been revealed to him. Across time, the image persists. Enoch as a bridge, not only between humans and heaven, but between eras, between ways of knowing. If so, then the question is no longer only historical. It becomes personal. What does it mean to live in a world where knowledge is both gift and danger, where wisdom can elevate or corrupt, where the line between myth and history is never clear? Enoch's story doesn't provide easy answers. It invites us instead to dwell in the tension, to recognize that our hunger for understanding is as old as civilization itself, and that the pursuit of knowledge always carries risk. Perhaps that is why his visions still unsettle, because in them we glimpse not only the fall of angels, but the mirror of our own desires. And so, as we walk further into the corridors of his text, we are left with a question that resists closure. What if Enoch's world was not merely a metaphorical dreamscape, but a memory of encounters our ancestors could neither forget nor fully explain? What if the Watchers, the Nephilim, the floods, were echoes of realities we have yet to face again? It is in the haunting silence after such questions that the weight of the forbidden book truly settles, reminding us that history may be far more porous and far more mysterious than we dare to admit. There is a moment in the Book of Enoch when the vision shifts from earth to sky, as if the reader is being pulled upward alongside him. He describes being carried on the wings of angels, passing over mountains whose peaks burn like fire, valleys that shimmer as though filled with molten metal, rivers that shine with light instead of water. To a modern imagination, these passages feel almost like descriptions of flight, of looking down from a vantage point no ancient human should have had. The question presses: was Enoch describing an inner vision, the landscape of a soul lifted into ecstasy? Or was he recording something witnessed with his own eyes, something our categories still struggle to name? His journey leads him not only across landscapes, but into the architecture of the cosmos itself. He sees the chambers where the winds are stored, the vaults where the snow and hail wait for their release, the fiery corridors where the thunder and lightning are kept. The imagery is poetic, but it also reflects a deep intuition that behind every phenomenon lies a hidden order, a system of forces that can be summoned, measured, perhaps even controlled. The ancients may not have had the language of physics, but they sensed that lightning was not random, that stars moved in patterns, that seasons obeyed unseen laws. In Enoch's visions, these laws appear as rooms and storehouses, as if the universe itself were a palace filled with secrets waiting to be unlocked. It is here that we encounter the astronomical book, one of the 5 sections that make up the text. In it, Enoch records the movements of the sun, the moon, and the stars, their risings and settings, the gates through which they pass on their journeys across the sky. Scholars who have studied these passages are struck by how detailed they are and how closely they align with actual astronomical cycles. The Book of Enoch outlines a solar calendar of 364 days, astonishingly close to the year we know today. Was this the product of human observation, carefully recorded across generations? Or was it, as the text itself suggests, revealed to Enoch by beings who understood more than any shepherd or farmer of his time could grasp? What makes this more intriguing is that many ancient cultures suddenly appear to have mastered advanced astronomy in ways that seem disproportionate to their technological context. The Sumerians, for instance, mapped the movements of planets visible only with telescopes. The Mayans constructed calendars of breathtaking precision. The builders of Stonehenge aligned massive stones with solstices and lunar cycles. Were these achievements born solely of patience and observation, or do they hint at knowledge seeded from elsewhere, echoes of the same instruction that Enoch claimed to have received? The figure of Enoch stands at the center of these mysteries, but his story also touches on themes that reverberate across civilizations. In Egypt, Thoth was revered as the inventor of writing and the keeper of celestial secrets. In Greece, Hermes carried messages between gods and men and was linked to wisdom hidden in symbols. Among Arabs, Idris was remembered as a sage who foresaw the coming flood. All these figures share the same silhouette: the mediator, the one who ascends and descends, who gathers knowledge from the heavens and delivers it to humanity. Could they all be cultural memories of a single figure? One remembered under many names, reshaped by each people into their own mythology? The text also hints at the fragility of such knowledge. Just as the Watchers gave arts that unbalanced humanity, Enoch's own revelations walk the knife's edge between illumination and danger. If thunder and lightning are forces that can be understood, might they also be forces that can be harnessed? If the stars move according to laws, can those laws be bent? These questions echo in modern times, when our own scientific advances often arrive before we are ready for their consequences. Nuclear energy can light cities or level them. Genetic engineering can heal or harm. Artificial intelligence can expand possibilities or close them down. The dilemma Enoch faced, the gift of knowledge that overwhelms the receiver, is one that has never left us. And then there is the flood. In the narrative, it looms like a shadow at the edge of every vision. The corruption of the earth, the violence of the giants, the misuse of knowledge, all of it leads toward one outcome: a purging. The flood becomes not just punishment, but reset, a cosmic cleansing that wipes away the hybrid chaos of the Watcher's legacy. Enoch does not live to see it. According to the text, he is taken to heaven in a chariot of fire, spared the destruction. But his grandson, Noah, carries the burden forward. Here the two stories overlap, the hidden Book of Enoch and the canonical tale of Genesis, and yet their tone is markedly different. In Genesis, the flood is a moral reckoning. In Enoch, it is also the conclusion of a cosmic rebellion, the attempt to erase the traces of a forbidden mingling between heaven and earth. What is striking is how nearly every ancient culture carries its own memory of a great deluge. The Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh tells of Utnapishtim, warned by a god to build a vessel before waters consumed the land. In Hindu tradition, Manu survives a flood that drowns the world, guided by a fish that reveals itself as divine. In Mesoamerican myths, successive worlds end in floods before the present age begins. Again and again, humanity remembers water sweeping across the earth, reshaping not only landscapes, but the very order of life. Whether these are independent inventions or cultural memories of real cataclysmic floods at the end of the Ice Age, they converge with uncanny similarity. And in the Book of Enoch, this global memory finds its theological explanation: a judgment aimed not only at humanity, but at the Watchers themselves. The deeper one follows these threads, the harder it becomes to dismiss them as coincidence. Why do stories of giants recur from Ireland to Mesopotamia to the Americas? Why do cultures separated by oceans remember floods of similar scale? Why do figures like Enoch, Thoth, Hermes, and Idris echo one another across time? Perhaps these are archetypes, patterns the human psyche generates again and again. Or perhaps they are fragments of history, carried like fossils through language and myth, remnants of encounters that shaped humanity more profoundly than our textbooks admit. In the end, the Book of Enoch offers no easy answers. It does not resolve the tension between metaphor and memory. Instead, it heightens it, daring us to sit in the discomfort. Was Enoch truly taken into heaven, or was he a visionary spinning cosmic poetry out of earthly longings? Were the Watchers angels, or metaphors for kings and conquerors who overwhelmed early societies? Were the Nephilim flesh and blood giants, or the embodiment of fears about forces too great to resist? The text leaves these questions hanging, not as failures but as invitations, and perhaps that is its enduring power. Unlike canonical scripture, which seeks to instruct and unify, the Book of Enoch unsettles and multiplies possibilities. It whispers of lost histories, of forgotten catastrophes, of knowledge hidden and revealed. It casts doubt on the neat boundaries we draw between myth and fact, urging us to imagine that the world is stranger, more layered, and more haunted than we allow ourselves to believe. In that sense, Enoch's visions are not just relics of the past, they are mirrors held up to our present, reflecting both our hunger for knowledge and our fear of its price. If the flood is the great reset in Enoch's story, then what comes before it is a meditation on how chaos builds, grain by grain, until only destruction can sweep it away. In the visions attributed to him, corruption begins subtly, with desire, with curiosity, with the crossing of lines that were meant to hold firm. The Watchers descend not with armies, but with whispers of forbidden knowledge, with glances that stir longing, with promises of power. Humanity, drawn by the allure of wisdom and strength, reaches for what is offered, not realizing that every gift carries its shadow. The tragedy is not simply that giants are born, but that the very order of the world begins to collapse, leaving no path forward except ruin. Enoch is placed in the middle of this unraveling. Unlike Noah, who receives precise instructions to build an ark, Enoch's task is stranger. He is to record, to witness, to intercede. He writes petitions for the Watchers, delivers messages of judgment, journeys into realms no other mortal has seen. His role is not survival, but mediation, the one who stands between heaven and earth, between divine wrath and human bewilderment. In this sense, he becomes less a character in a story, and more a lens through which humanity confronts its own relationship with the unknown. He is both participant and scribe, both prophet and recorder, both man and something almost more. The Watchers, in their desperation, cling to him. They beg him to intercede, to soften the decree that binds them in eternal chains. But when he carries their pleas upward, the answer is cold and final. There will be no forgiveness. What they have done has crossed the point of return. Their children, the Nephilim, are doomed to perish. Their own fate is imprisonment in the depths of the earth until the day of final judgment. The detail is chilling. The very beings who once watched humanity are now themselves watched, not as guardians but as captives, shackled by the same law they once defied. The image of angels bound beneath mountains resonates far beyond Enoch. In Greek mythology, the defeated Titans are hurled into Tartarus, chained in shadow beneath the earth. In Norse tales, Loki is bound with chains until Ragnarok. In Christian tradition, Revelation speaks of Satan bound for 1,000 years. Across cultures, there is this recurring image: powerful beings confined, waiting, their fury simmering until the appointed time. It is as if humanity, across its myths, intuited that rebellion cannot simply be erased but must be contained, hidden beneath the surface like magma beneath stone, always threatening to erupt again. What unsettles is how Enoch insists on the physicality of these visions. He does not speak in vague allegories, but in specific descriptions. The dimensions of caverns, the burning chains, the cries of imprisoned angels. It reads less like a metaphor for sin and more like a report from a place he has seen. And in this concreteness lies the danger for early religious authorities. A text so vivid, so insistent on its reality, could fracture belief, opening space for interpretations outside their control. Perhaps this is why the Book of Enoch was excluded. Not because it lacked power, but because it had too much. Even so, fragments of its influence remain in the traditions that followed. The Epistle of Jude in the New Testament quotes directly from Enoch, invoking the image of the Lord coming with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment. Early church fathers debated its status, some embracing it, others rejecting it. In Ethiopia, it remained canon, read alongside the Gospels. In other lands, it survived only in fragments, whispers, and echoes. Yet its themes seeped into theology: the fall of angels, the corruption of knowledge, the flood as divine judgment. Even when silenced, Enoch's voice left its imprint. And beyond theology, the questions his visions raise have a way of resurfacing in unexpected places. The idea of forbidden knowledge, of wisdom that humanity was not ready to receive, finds echoes in modern fears of technology. When nuclear energy was unlocked, it promised boundless power, yet it also cast the shadow of annihilation. When the human genome was mapped, it opened doors to healing, but also to manipulation. Artificial intelligence, too, carries both promise and dread. In each case, we find ourselves replaying the same dilemma described in Enoch: the hunger for knowledge, the risk of corruption, the possibility that what is given cannot be controlled. The flood that follows in the narrative is not merely an act of destruction, but a warning. It suggests that when corruption reaches a certain point, balance can only be restored through catastrophe. The earth itself cries out, and the heavens respond with waters that sweep away the giants, the Watcher's legacy, the violence of a world out of control. It is not only humanity that suffers, but the very fabric of creation that must be renewed. And in this, the Book of Enoch aligns with the global memory of floods recorded in cultures across the world, a collective scar carried in story and ritual. What lingers, however, is the haunting possibility that the Watcher's story is not only about angels and giants, but about humanity itself. We, too, are creatures who reach for what we are not ready to hold. We, too, take gifts and turn them into weapons, take wisdom and twist it into pride. The Book of Enoch becomes a mirror, reflecting not only the mythic past but the ongoing human condition. It forces us to ask whether we are any different from those who once stood on Mount Hermon, dazzled by the promise of knowledge, blind to the cost. And then there is Enoch himself, the man who walked with God and was no more. His disappearance remains one of the most enigmatic details in Scripture. Genesis gives no explanation, only that God took him. But in the Book of Enoch, this mystery is filled out with visions of ascent, a fiery chariot, angelic guides, journeys through the heavens. Was this the poetic way of saying that he died? Or was it the testimony of an actual removal, an ancient version of what later ages would call ascension? If so, Enoch is not merely a prophet but a prototype, the first human lifted beyond mortality into a realm reserved for the divine. It is this ambiguity between myth and memory, symbol and event, that gives the Book of Enoch its enduring fascination. It is not a tidy narrative that can be filed away, but a labyrinth of questions. Did angels really descend? Did giants really walk the earth? Did floods really reset civilization? Or are these the shapes our ancestors gave to experiences too vast to express in plain terms? The text does not answer. It leaves us to wrestle with the questions. And perhaps that is the point. Not to resolve, but to remind us that the past is stranger, the present more fragile, and the future more uncertain than we like to believe. When we follow Enoch's path into the visions of heaven, the text begins to feel less like a story and more like a guided journey through layers of reality. He describes being led by luminous beings through regions that seem both familiar and utterly alien. At one moment he looks down on the earth, its rivers and mountains spread like a map beneath him. At another, he is shown places where souls wait, separated into chambers of light and darkness depending on their deeds. What he sees is not the vague afterlife of later theology, but something more architectural, as if creation itself were divided into halls and corridors, each with its appointed purpose. In one vision, he sees the Garden of Righteousness, a place of beauty where the tree of life stands, its fruit reserved for the just. This detail reverberates later in the book of Genesis, where the tree of life becomes a symbol of what Adam and Eve were denied. Was Genesis borrowing from Enoch, reshaping his vision into its own story of beginnings and exile? Or were both drawing from an older source, a memory so ancient it found expression in multiple traditions? The lines blur until we cannot tell where myth ends and scripture begins. What makes these passages compelling is not only their content, but their tone. Enoch does not speak like a poet inventing allegories. He speaks like a witness recording what he has been shown. He gives measurements, directions, sequences of events, as though desperate to preserve the details before they slip away. In one place, he notes the path of the sun through 6 eastern gates and 6 western gates, describing how the days lengthen and shorten as it shifts. To him, this is not abstract astronomy, but revelation, proof that the universe is governed by laws, not chaos. The stars, too, are said to be bound to courses, their wanderings controlled by angelic overseers, and when stars disobey, they are cast into darkness, punished like the watchers. The cosmos itself becomes moral, every celestial body accountable, every movement part of a larger judgment. The imagery may seem archaic, yet beneath it lies a startlingly modern intuition, that the universe is structured, that laws exist beyond human will, that energy and matter obey principles as unyielding as commandments. When Nikola Tesla spoke of energy, frequency, and vibration as the keys to understanding reality, he unknowingly echoed the same themes Enoch described in ancient language. The difference is not in the essence, but in the vocabulary, one framed in scientific terms, the other in mythic visions. Could it be that what we call science and what the ancients called revelation are simply different ways of approaching the same hidden order? And then there are the angels themselves, figures who in Enoch are anything but abstract. He names them, describes their roles: Michael, the great protector; Raphael, the healer; Gabriel, the messenger of power. They are not vague symbols, but active participants in the drama of creation. They bind the watchers, guard the righteous, deliver visions. In later traditions, these names persist, woven into Jewish, Christian, and Islamic lore. Yet here, in the Book of Enoch, they appear in one of their earliest forms, not as distant icons, but as forces moving through history. The persistence of these names across millennia suggests that, whatever their origin, they struck something deep in human consciousness. A sense that the unseen world is not empty, but populated by intelligences beyond us. Equally striking is Enoch's role as mediator. He is not merely shown visions, he is tasked with carrying messages back and forth. At times he pleads for humanity. At times he delivers judgment. At times he is the voice that explains what is otherwise incomprehensible. In this role, he becomes a prototype for later prophets, but with a difference. Where Isaiah or Jeremiah spoke words of warning to their people, Enoch moves between worlds. His stage not only Israel, but the entire cosmos. His story is less national than universal, less about one people than about the fate of creation itself. The Book of Enoch also lingers on the fate of the Nephilim after death. Their bodies are destroyed in the flood, but their spirits, it says, remain on earth, restless, hungry, malevolent. These wandering souls are said to be the origin of unclean spirits, what later traditions would call demons. Here we glimpse a genealogy of the supernatural. Angels fall, their children become giants, the giants die, their spirits linger as forces of corruption. It is a grim chain of descent, a shadow lineage running parallel to humanity. And once again, the theme resurfaces in later traditions, demons as spirits without bodies, tormenting humans because they crave the flesh they once possessed. All of this raises the question, why was such a book excluded from the biblical canon? The official explanation is that it was not deemed inspired, but perhaps the deeper reason is that it was too dangerous. It presented a world too complex, too untamed, where even angels could fall, where knowledge itself was suspect, where the universe was charged with moral consequence. It left little room for neat categories, for a theology that could be easily controlled. And yet its exclusion did not erase it. Copies survived, carried into Ethiopia, hidden in caves, quoted in obscure texts. Like the Watchers themselves, it was bound but not destroyed, waiting to be rediscovered. For us today, the Book of Enoch poses an even more unsettling challenge. If we take it seriously, we must accept that our ancestors carried memories or visions that do not fit the linear progression of history we have been taught. We must accept that floods, giants, and angels are not just metaphors, but perhaps fragments of experiences that defy our categories. If we dismiss it, we must explain why such a text echoed across so many cultures, why its themes refuse to die. Either way, we are left with the sense that the neat story of humanity, primitive hunters evolving into modern civilizations, is missing pieces, and that those pieces may be stranger than we dare imagine. Perhaps that is why the Book of Enoch has endured. It does not resolve the mystery, it deepens it. It does not offer comfort, but discomfort, forcing us to see that our past is not only human, but intertwined with forces beyond our control. And in doing so, it whispers a truth that resonates across time. That history is not just what is written by the victors, but also what is hidden, suppressed, or forgotten, waiting for those willing to listen in the silence of ancient caves. If we pause for a moment and look at the figure of Enoch from the outside, as if he were not only a character within a text, but a thread weaving through cultures, we begin to notice something unusual. He is never allowed to vanish. Most patriarchs fade after their brief mention, names in genealogies, markers in the long story of ancestry. But Enoch lingers, not in one tradition but in many, resurfacing under different names, carrying with him the same aura of wisdom, secrecy, and ascension. It is as though humanity itself has refused to let him go, reshaping him again and again into a vessel for forbidden knowledge. In Jewish tradition, he becomes Metatron, an angel so exalted that he sits beside God's throne, writing down the deeds of humanity. In Islam, he is Idris, the sage and prophet who foresaw the flood and was lifted into the heavens. In Egyptian lore, he is remembered as Thoth, the divine scribe, inventor of writing and guardian of hidden wisdom. The Greeks recognized him as Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great father of alchemy and astrology. Each culture transforms him, yet the silhouette is unmistakable. The man who bridged heaven and earth, who learned secrets not meant for mortals, who was taken up rather than allowed to die. What makes this persistence remarkable is that these cultures were separated by geography and time, yet they preserved the same archetype. Did they borrow from one another, reshaping a single tradition as it traveled? Or did they each inherit echoes of a memory older than all of them, fragments of a story that predated their divergence? If so, Enoch, or whatever his first name was, may not be invention, but remembrance, an ancestral shadow lingering at the edge of history. The Book of Enoch itself seems aware of this weight. It does not present its visions as fleeting dreams, but as revelations meant to endure. The author insists repeatedly on his own presence, noting dates and details, as if fearful that later generations would dismiss him as mere myth. His voice carries urgency, as though he knows that memory is fragile and truth, once forgotten, is nearly impossible to recover. I, Enoch, was in my house alone when two men appeared. It is the insistence of a witness, someone desperate to anchor his vision in the realm of reality. And yet, ironically, his very insistence may have sealed his text's exclusion. For a church eager to unify, to create a single canon that would bind a growing community, a book filled with giants, imprisoned angels, and cosmic laws was too destabilizing. It opened too many doors, raised too many questions. Better to silence it than to let it fracture the fragile unity of early Christianity. Thus, the Book of Enoch was left outside the official canon, surviving in Ethiopia and in fragments scattered through languages, waiting like buried seeds for rediscovery. The rediscovery came, as we know, in the caves of Qumran, when shepherd boys stumbled upon clay jars that had not been opened for centuries. The Dead Sea Scrolls contained hymns, laws, apocalyptic visions, but among them, pieces of Enoch. When scholars pieced them together, they found a text that was not marginal but central, one that had influenced early Christian thought, one that had shaped Jewish mysticism, one that had been known and quoted but then erased. In that moment, the forgotten voice returned, unsettling once again the story of how our scriptures came to be. But the question remains, why do these stories matter? Why does it matter that Enoch saw visions of angels, that he described giants, that he spoke of floods? Perhaps because they remind us that history is not simply a linear path from ignorance to enlightenment. It is full of ruptures, of forgotten knowledge, of memories that do not fit our current frameworks. The Book of Enoch confronts us with the possibility that the past contained encounters we can barely comprehend, and that our ancestors recorded them as best they could in the language of myth and revelation. Take the Anunnaki of Sumer, for example, beings who descended from the heavens, who mingled with humanity, who brought knowledge and judgment. Their story parallels the Watchers so closely that one wonders if they are different names for the same beings, remembered in different tongues. The Sumerians called them those who came from above. Enoch called them Watchers. Both traditions spoke of hybrid offspring, of floods that wiped away corruption, of wisdom given and misused. Could these be independent inventions, or are they shards of a single event, fractured into myth as it traveled across lands and centuries? Even more haunting is the way these themes resonate with the human psyche. The idea of beings from above, whether angels, gods, or visitors, seems almost universal. Every culture imagines the sky as the home of powers, and every culture tells stories of those powers descending. Perhaps this is simply projection, the natural impulse to place the divine in the unreachable expanse above. Or perhaps it reflects something more literal, some ancient encounter whose details were blurred into myth, but whose impact was too great to vanish. In this sense, the Book of Enoch may not be only about the past, but about the nature of memory itself. Human beings remember not only in facts, but in symbols, in images charged with meaning. When something extraordinary occurs, it is not always preserved in literal detail. It is encoded in story, mythologized so it can survive the erosion of time. The giants, the floods, the angels, perhaps these are the symbolic clothing of events that truly happened, events so strange they could not be described in ordinary words. To dismiss them as pure fantasy is to underestimate the way memory works. The endurance of Enoch's figure suggests that humanity, at some level, recognizes him as a vessel for truths it does not want to lose. Whether he was a historical man, a prophet, or a myth, the archetype he represents has proven indispensable. The mediator, the knower, the one who ascends. And perhaps that is why his book continues to unsettle us. It does not sit quietly in the past. It presses against the present, asking whether we too are ready for the knowledge we seek, whether we can bear the consequences of wisdom without falling as the Watchers did. And so, the Book of Enoch becomes not only a record of ancient visions, but a mirror for modern humanity. As we advance in technology, as we unlock secrets of the atom, the genome, the mind, we find ourselves replaying the same dilemma. Knowledge as gift, knowledge as curse. The question is no longer whether angels once fell, but whether we are destined to fall in the same way, blinded by our hunger, bound by our own creations, swept away by the very forces we unleashed. In this light, Enoch's visions are not relics of a distant age, but warnings written in the language of myth. Reminders that the pursuit of knowledge without wisdom leads not to illumination, but to flood. The further we walk into the corridors of the Book of Enoch, the more it feels like standing at the threshold of two worlds, one familiar, shaped by the traditions of scripture and history we know, and one far older, darker, and stranger, preserved in fragments that refuse to be silenced. At the heart of this strangeness lies the recurring figure of the flood, looming like a shadow at the end of every vision. It is not simply a storm or a disaster. It is portrayed as the inevitable consequence of corruption. the cleansing of a world poisoned by forbidden unions and dangerous knowledge. But the flood is more than a punishment. It is a memory, one that humanity has carried across continents and millennia. Everywhere we look, cultures tell of waters that rose beyond their boundaries, swallowing cities, reshaping lands, leaving survivors to rebuild from the ruins. The Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh speaks of Utnapishtim, chosen to build a vessel and save life from a deluge sent by the gods. In India, the figure of Manu is warned by a divine fish to prepare for waters that would drown the world. In Mesoamerica, successive worlds end in floods before the present one begins. Even in faraway Polynesia, stories tell of waves that swept across islands, erasing villages and forcing new beginnings. Such parallels are too consistent, too widespread to be ignored. They point to something deeper than coincidence, a collective memory etched into the human story. Modern science offers its own explanations. At the end of the last ice age, roughly 10,000 years ago, glaciers melted, seas rose, and coastlines vanished beneath the waves. Great floods swept across river valleys, drowning fertile plains and driving survivors to higher ground. Archaeology shows us that once thriving settlements were abandoned, swallowed by rising waters. To the people who lived through it, such catastrophes must have felt like the end of the world. They would have turned to story, to myth, to explain what they could not otherwise endure. And so the memory of floods became sacred narrative, carried forward through song and scripture, encoded in tales of divine judgment. The Book of Enoch situates itself within this global memory, but adds its own dimension. The flood is not only natural, but moral. It is not the glaciers melting that destroys the world, but the corruption seeded by the watchers. It is the violence of the giants, the misuse of forbidden knowledge, the cries of humanity rising to heaven. In this, the text merges geology with theology, turning catastrophe into cosmic drama. And perhaps that is why it endures, because it does not separate the physical and the moral, but binds them into one story of cause and consequence. Enoch himself does not live to see the waters rise. He is taken before, lifted into the heavens in a chariot of fire, vanishing from the earth. But his grandson, Noah, inherits the burden. In Genesis, Noah is the obedient servant who builds an ark to preserve life. In Enoch, his role is more complex. He becomes the continuation of a story that began with rebellion. A man chosen not only for righteousness, but because he carries the legacy of Enoch's visions. The flood, then, is not just about survival. It is about continuity, about carrying forward fragments of a past too dangerous to be remembered in full. This raises a haunting question. What exactly was destroyed in that deluge? Was it only the bodies of the Nephilim, the hybrid giants who ravaged the land? Or was it also the knowledge the Watchers had given, washed away to prevent humanity from reaching too far, too fast? If so, then the flood was not only punishment but erasure, a deliberate attempt to reset civilization, to strip it of advances it could not yet handle. And if that is true, then history itself becomes a cycle of revelation and forgetting, knowledge given and taken, progress rising and falling like the tides. The echoes of this idea can be found in other traditions. Atlantis, as described by Plato, was said to have fallen in a single day and night of floods and earthquakes, its knowledge lost to the sea. Hindu cycles of yugas speak of ages of wisdom followed by ages of decline, each ending in destruction and renewal. Even modern myths, from science fiction to conspiracy theories, play with the notion that civilizations rise and fall, that great knowledge is given and then erased, leaving only fragments behind. In all of them, the flood stands as symbol and memory, a moment when the world was washed clean and only a few survived to tell the tale. What is most unsettling is how archaeological discoveries occasionally brush against these myths. Submerged ruins have been found off the coasts of India and Japan, structures too precise to be dismissed as natural. Ancient maps, like the Piri Reis chart of the 16th century, depict coastlines of Antarctica free of ice, suggesting memories older than recorded history. Stone monuments, aligned with celestial events, rise out of the earth in places where no written language existed to explain them. Each fragment whispers of a past deeper than we imagine, a past that might include the very knowledge Enoch describes: astronomy, metallurgy, architecture, passed down before the flood swept it away. If this is so, then the Book of Enoch is not simply myth but testimony, a record of what was lost, a reminder of why it was taken, a warning of what happens when knowledge and desire outrun wisdom. The flood becomes not just a story of divine wrath, but a cycle, one that may repeat if we fail to learn. For are we not, in our own age, in a similar position? We, too, are unlocking secrets once thought forbidden, splitting the atom, altering the genome, creating machines that think. We, too, are consuming resources at a pace that threatens collapse. We, too, may be walking toward a reckoning, one not of water, but of fire. Not sent by gods, but unleashed by our own hands. Perhaps that is why the Book of Enoch continues to unsettle. It is not only about the past, but about the present, about the recurring pattern of hubris and downfall. It whispers that we are not the first to face the danger of forbidden knowledge, nor will we be the last. And it reminds us that the flood is never only behind us. It is always ahead, waiting, ready to rise when we cross too many lines. As we step back from the visions of giants and angels, we are left with the sobering realization that the flood, whether literal or symbolic, is not only a story of destruction, but of survival. For every tale of waters rising, there is also a tale of one who endures, who carries forward the fragments of a shattered world. And in that endurance lies hope. The idea that even when knowledge is lost, even when civilizations fall, humanity can begin again. But the question remains, at what cost and with what memory? If the flood in Enoch's visions is the great turning of the wheel, the moment when corruption is washed away and the story begins again, then what follows is not silence, but the persistence of memory. For waters may drown bodies and sweep away cities, but they cannot fully erase the traces of what came before. The Book of Enoch, even in its fragmented survival, is itself proof of that persistence. Though excluded from the canon, though hidden in caves and nearly forgotten, it endures, like a whisper through time, refusing to die. And in that endurance lies one of the most haunting questions of all. What truths are too dangerous to forget, even when the world tries to bury them? Enoch's visions carry us beyond the flood into the structure of the cosmos itself. He describes journeys where he sees the ends of the earth, where the sun rests after its course, where the stars emerge from their gates. He is shown places where souls are held, some in brightness, others in shadow, waiting for judgment. To him, death is not an end, but a passage into chambers, a division of light and dark. This notion would echo into later traditions of heaven and hell, but here it is presented with startling concreteness. He is not speaking of vague moral states, but of places with geography, architecture, and gates. The universe is a vast palace, and every being has its appointed room. In one vision, he sees the tree of life, luminous and eternal, reserved for the righteous who will one day eat its fruit. This tree appears again in Genesis, standing in Eden, and later in Revelation, where its leaves heal the nations. Across centuries and cultures, it remains the same image, a source of immortality, guarded, withheld, promised but not yet granted. Could it be that Enoch's description is the original, and all later versions are echoes? Or are they all drawing from an even older memory, passed down through ages too remote to trace? The Book of Enoch also lingers on the mysteries of light and energy. He speaks of the secrets of lightning, of the forces that crack the sky and shake the ground. Some interpreters suggest these passages might encode early understandings of electricity, of energy as something stored and unleashed. When Nikola Tesla, centuries later, declared that the universe is best understood in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration, it sounded like a modern breakthrough. But perhaps it was a rediscovery of truths known and then forgotten. Could it be that Enoch's visions were glimpses of principles beyond his era, preserved in symbolic language, until a time when humanity could finally translate them into science? Such speculation is not new. Mystics, philosophers, and scientists alike have looked to ancient texts for fragments of lost knowledge. The Hermetic writings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, who may be another mask of Enoch, speak of correspondences between heaven and earth, of hidden laws binding all things. Alchemists sought in them the keys to transformation, to turning base metal into gold, to unlocking the spark of immortality. Kabbalists saw in Enoch the figure of Metatron, the angel who mediates between God and creation, keeper of divine mysteries. Again and again, across time, humanity has returned to him, as if sensing that his story conceals something vital, something we are not ready to abandon. And what of the Watchers, those fallen ones whose rebellion set this drama in motion? In Enoch's text, they are punished, bound in the depths, their children destroyed. Yet their presence lingers in the form of restless spirits, the origin, it says, of demons who plague humanity. This genealogy of evil is striking because it offers an explanation that ties the visible to the invisible. The violence of giants becomes the torment of spirits, corruption made eternal. Later traditions would simplify this, speaking of Satan and his angels, but the Book of Enoch preserves a more complex vision. Evil as a lineage, born of transgression, perpetuated in shadow. Such ideas might unsettle us, but they also resonate with the human sense that corruption does not simply vanish. Violence leaves scars that outlast the moment. Knowledge misused leaves consequences that echo through generations. Perhaps the restless spirits of the Nephilim are not only myth but metaphor, symbols of how wrongdoing survives beyond its origin, shaping history long after the actors are gone. And perhaps that is why the text insists on binding the Watchers, locking them away until judgment, because their influence, if left unchecked, would never end. When we read these passages, we may feel caught between skepticism and wonder. Are these literal truths of angels and giants, or symbolic codes for something else? The power of the Book of Enoch is that it does not let us settle easily on either side. It insists on being taken seriously, on being read as more than metaphor, even as it overwhelms our rational categories. It whispers that myth may be memory, that symbol may be testimony, that what we dismiss as fantasy may be fragments of realities we have forgotten. And so we are left with the enduring riddle of Enoch himself. Was he a man granted visions of the cosmos, or was he the voice of a community remembering encounters with powers beyond human? Was he the first mystic, or the first scientist, or the first traveler to glimpse worlds outside his own? The text does not resolve the riddle. It deepens it. He is both and neither, a figure who stands at the threshold, always vanishing into light just as we think we have grasped him. Perhaps that is why his story has lasted. For in Enoch we see not only the past but ourselves. We too live in an age of floods, of rising seas, of overwhelming knowledge, of boundaries crossed before we are ready. We too wrestle with gifts that may destroy us, with knowledge that may unbalance the world. In that sense, the Book of Enoch is less about ancient angels and more about the eternal human condition. It tells us that every generation stands on the edge of a flood, every generation tempted by forbidden knowledge, every generation searching for a mediator to guide us through. And so the visions continue, winding through chambers of heaven, through judgments and floods, through giants and angels. They do not end neatly, but open out into larger questions. What is history? What is memory? What is the boundary between human and divine, between myth and reality? These are the questions Enoch leaves us with, questions that refuse closure, questions that echo across time like the sound of water receding after a storm, leaving behind a silence filled with possibility. As the visions of Enoch deepen, a curious pattern emerges, the blending of myth and geography, as though the boundaries between the spiritual and the physical world were never meant to be separate. He is not merely told abstract truths. He is shown landscapes, places that could be walked upon, rivers that flow, mountains that burn, valleys filled with strange light. It is as if the unseen realm lies just beneath the surface of the scene, waiting for eyes trained to perceive it. For Enoch, the world is a layered structure, a cosmic architecture, and he is one of the few allowed to glimpse its foundations. In one account, he is guided to the ends of the earth, where he sees the great beasts that dwell in the deep waters and the gates through which the winds emerge. He sees the resting places of the sun and the moon, the prisons of the stars that have strayed from their paths. Each vision unfolds like a map of reality, both physical and metaphysical. To his mind, storms are not accidents but forces stored in heavenly chambers, released at appointed times. The cosmos is not an empty expanse, but a kingdom filled with laws and overseers. Even lightning is a mystery guarded by angels, a secret energy wielded with intention. To us, such descriptions may sound primitive, the attempts of an ancient to explain phenomena he could not yet understand. But the persistence of these images across cultures suggests something more. The Babylonians, too, spoke of winds kept in storehouses. The Egyptians described the journey of the sun through gates in the underworld. The Norse envisioned Bifrost, the rainbow bridge linking worlds. Why do so many traditions imagine the cosmos as structured, ordered, governed by hidden forces? Perhaps because they intuited, even without modern science, that reality is not chaos, but pattern, and that those patterns could be glimpsed through vision, ritual, or revelation. The Book of Enoch emphasizes again and again that knowledge is never neutral. To know the courses of the stars is not only to understand time, but to touch destiny. To uncover the secrets of thunder and lightning is not merely to observe weather, but to grasp powers that can bless or destroy. This is why the Watcher's gifts to humanity are so dangerous. They are not simply practical skills, but keys to forces that can unbalance the world. To forge metal is to make both plow and sword. To adorn the body is to invite both beauty and envy. To read the stars is to unlock both wisdom and arrogance. The corruption lies not in knowledge itself, but in its misuse, in humanity's inability to bear its weight without distortion. Enoch, in contrast, is portrayed as one who bears such knowledge without falling. He receives visions, yet he does not turn them to pride or violence. He mediates, records, intercedes. In this sense, he stands as the counter-image to the Watchers, a human who ascends toward the divine without rebellion, in contrast to angels who descend and corrupt. His life becomes a mirror, asking whether humanity can handle knowledge wisely or whether we are destined to repeat the fall again and again. The imagery of ascent, of being lifted into heaven, of riding a chariot of fire, has always fascinated interpreters. Some see in it echoes of shamanic journeys, the ecstatic flights of visionaries across cultures. Others wonder whether it conceals memories of something more tangible, encounters with beings or technologies that ancient language could only describe in terms of fire and wings. Did Enoch simply dream, or was he taken? And if taken, by whom? These questions remain unanswered, yet the persistence of the motif across civilizations suggests that the idea of ascension, of humans being lifted into realms beyond, was more than fantasy. It was memory, possibility, or both. Later traditions could not ignore this. In Christianity, Elijah is also said to be taken into heaven in a chariot of fire. In Islam, Muhammad journeys through the heavens on the night of Isra and Miraj. In Buddhism, certain sages are said to ascend beyond death, transcending the cycle of rebirth. Again and again, cultures preserve the archetype of the one who is taken, who vanishes from earth without dying. And always, these figures are linked to wisdom, to visions, to revelations too great for ordinary mortals. Enoch stands at the head of this lineage, the prototype for all who follow. The visions also introduce us to figures who will become central in later theology. The archangels, Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, Uriel. Each plays a role in guiding, punishing, or revealing. They are not distant abstractions, but vivid presences, commanding and precise. Michael binds the rebellious, Raphael heals the earth, Gabriel announces judgment, Uriel explains mysteries. In naming them, the Book of Enoch fixes their roles in the human imagination, roles that would echo for millennia. The angels of annunciation, healing, and protection so familiar in later faiths are already here, acting within Enoch's visions. But alongside them are darker figures, the leaders of the Watchers, like Semjaza and Azazel. Their names, too, endure, sometimes resurfacing in later demonologies. Azazel, in particular, becomes infamous, associated with the scapegoat ritual in Leviticus, where sins are symbolically placed upon a goat and sent into the wilderness. In some traditions, he is remembered as the one who taught humanity warfare and ornamentation, corruption disguised as beauty. The duality is stark, named angels who uphold creation, and named rebels who tear it down. Enoch's visions are populated not by vague symbols, but by personalities, each embodying aspects of knowledge, rebellion, or judgment. As we move deeper into his text, we sense that it is not only a revelation, but also a warning. The flood is coming, yes, but beyond the flood lies a cycle that repeats. Knowledge given, knowledge misused, catastrophe unleashed, humanity forgets, begins again, climbs toward wisdom, and once more reaches too far. Enoch's visions suggest that history itself is cyclical, not linear, a pattern of rise, fall, and renewal. If so, then his book is not just a record of the past, but a mirror for the future, reminding us that we, too, live on the edge of a flood of our own making. Perhaps that is why the Book of Enoch has always been both feared and revered. It does not fit neatly into categories. It is too mythic to be history, too detailed to be dismissed as myth, too dangerous to be canonized, too powerful to be forgotten. It occupies the in-between, the threshold where memory and imagination blur, where truth hides in symbols. And in that threshold, it continues to speak, not only to the ancients, but to us, warning that the pursuit of knowledge without wisdom, the crossing of boundaries without restraint, always leads to collapse. Enoch's voice, preserved against all odds, reminds us that our world is fragile, that beneath the surface of our certainties lies a deeper, stranger story. And if we dare to listen, we may hear in his visions not only the echo of the past, but the prophecy of our own future. The further we follow Enoch into his visions, the more the text takes on the quality of a mirror held up to humanity itself. Though it speaks of angels and giants, of floods and judgments, beneath the imagery lies a recurring theme: the danger of desire unchecked, of knowledge untempered by wisdom. It is as if the Watchers, those radiant beings who abandoned their post to mingle with mortals, are not only celestial rebels, but reflections of our own impulses. They wanted to descend, to touch, to taste, to share secrets that were not theirs to give. And humanity, eager for what seemed like progress, received their gifts without caution. The result was a world spiraling into imbalance, until the only cure was catastrophe. But Enoch is not only a prophet of doom. His visions also reveal glimpses of hope, of restoration, of a future where justice is not only punishment, but renewal. In the Parables of Enoch, one of the 5 sections of the book, he describes a figure called the Son of Man, a luminous presence who will sit on a throne of glory and judge both the righteous and the wicked. To later readers, this passage would echo with uncanny familiarity, for the title, Son of Man, is the one most often used by Jesus in the Gospels. Could it be that the Book of Enoch shaped the imagination of early Christians? That its vision of a cosmic judge paved the way for how they understood the role of Christ? The parallels are too striking to ignore. In this vision, the Son of Man is not only a judge, but also a savior, a figure of light who defends the oppressed and vindicates the righteous. The world, so often tilted toward the powerful, is here set right. The mighty are cast down, the humble lifted up, the wicked exposed, the just rewarded. It is a vision of cosmic balance, where injustice cannot hide forever. For those living in times of suffering, such an image would be more than theology. It would be hope clothed in fire. And perhaps this is why the Book of Enoch, though banned from the canon, refused to vanish. It carried not only fear, but promise. Not only judgment, but the dream of a world restored. Yet even in these promises, the text never lets us forget the danger of knowledge. Again and again, Enoch insists that what he has been shown is not for all ears. He is commanded to write, but also warned to seal certain things, to keep some mysteries hidden until the appointed time. There is a sense that knowledge itself can be a double-edged sword, revelation in the right hands, destruction in the wrong. It is a theme that resonates powerfully today, when humanity grapples with technologies that can heal or annihilate, discoveries that open doors we are not sure we should walk through. In this way, Enoch feels less like an ancient relic and more like a timeless commentary on the human condition. The text also returns often to the figure of the earth itself, not as an inert stage for human drama, but as a living participant in the story. When the Nephilim devour and destroy, the earth cries out. When violence and corruption spread, creation itself groans under the weight. The flood is not only divine punishment, but also the planet's response, a purging of what it can no longer sustain. This personification of the earth is striking, for it anticipates modern ecological thought. The idea that the planet is not merely background, but a living system, one that reacts to imbalance. In Enoch's time, this idea was expressed as myth. Today, we frame it in terms of climate, ecosystems, and collapse. But the underlying truth is the same. When harmony is broken, the earth responds, often with force. What makes Enoch's visions so compelling is their refusal to separate the human from the cosmic. To him, every choice reverberates through creation. When angels fall, the earth suffers. When humanity sins, the stars themselves are affected. This interconnectedness may seem fantastical, but it reflects a worldview in which nothing is isolated. And perhaps that is why the text still speaks to us. Because in our own age, we are rediscovering that the world is a web, that every action ripples outward, that we are bound more tightly to creation than we realize. The Book of Enoch also pushes us to consider the porousness of boundaries between heaven and earth, divine and human, visible and invisible. These are not absolute walls, but thresholds that can be crossed, for better or worse. The Watchers crossed them in desire, and catastrophe followed. Enoch crossed them in vision, and wisdom was preserved. The difference lies not in the act of crossing, but in the spirit with which it is done. This theme challenges us to ask, when we cross boundaries today of knowledge, of power, of technology, are we doing so with wisdom or with hunger? Are we watchers or are we Enochs? Perhaps this is why Enoch's book continues to fascinate even in modern times. It does not offer simple answers, but forces us to wrestle with questions of responsibility, balance, and destiny. It tells us that the universe is alive with forces beyond us, that knowledge is both gift and trial, that history is shaped not only by what we remember, but by what we choose to forget. And it reminds us that even when floods erase, when civilizations fall, fragments of memory endure, waiting for those willing to listen. For the figure of Enoch himself is proof of that endurance. Briefly mentioned in Genesis, he could have been forgotten, swallowed by the tide of names and genealogies. Yet somehow, his story grew into a vast vision, carried across cultures, preserved against erasure. He became Thoth, Hermes, Idris, Metatron. He became the archetype of the Mediator, the scribe, the ascender, and in that transformation, he reveals something about humanity itself, that we need figures who stand at the threshold, who remind us that the world is larger than what we see, that knowledge is more than facts, that memory is deeper than history. As the parables of Enoch unfold, we sense that his visions are not just for his time, but for all time. They speak to a cycle of rebellion and judgment, of fall and restoration, that repeats across ages. They warn of floods, but also promise renewal. They reveal the danger of knowledge, but also its necessity. They remind us that every generation must choose how it will bear the gifts it has been given, whether to turn them to pride or to wisdom, to corruption or to hope. And perhaps that is why, though excluded, suppressed, and forgotten, the Book of Enoch keeps returning. It cannot be silenced because it speaks to something universal, something we all know but rarely admit, that our hunger for knowledge is both our greatest strength and our greatest danger, that the line between ascent and fall is thin, and that history itself is the story of what happens when we forget that truth. When the voice of Enoch shifts to the astronomical book, the narrative acquires a new tone, less mythic in imagery, more meticulous, almost mathematical. He describes the movements of the sun, moon, and stars, their risings and settings through specific gates on the horizon. The year, he insists, is divided into 364 days, a calendar that runs parallel to the solar cycle with uncanny precision. To the ancients, who struggled to measure time beyond the crude rhythm of seasons, such a system was extraordinary. Was it the product of centuries of careful observation, or, as Enoch's text insists, was it revealed by heavenly beings who understood the laws of the cosmos long before humanity did? The calendar in Enoch's book was more than a way of counting days. It became a sacred rhythm, a map of order woven into time itself. Each gate of the sun, each phase of the moon, each constellation of stars was a marker of divine design. To live by this calendar was to live in harmony with the cosmos. Deviating from it was not merely error, but rebellion. This blending of astronomy and theology reflects a worldview where science and spirituality are not separate domains, but two sides of the same truth. It is an idea modern thought often dismisses, yet one that continues to surface whenever we recognize that the laws of nature are, in their own way, laws of awe. What is startling is how similar systems appear across cultures far apart in space and time. The Mayan calendar, with its intricate cycles, mapped the heavens with stunning accuracy. The builders of Stonehenge aligned massive stones to the solstices. In Mesopotamia, ziggurats doubled as observatories, linking the movements of the heavens to the rituals of Earth. These parallels suggest that early civilizations possessed a depth of astronomical knowledge that seems disproportionate to their tools. Did they all discover it independently through relentless observation? Or were they, as the Book of Enoch suggests, the inheritors of knowledge given by beings who came from above? Such questions cannot be answered easily, but they linger, unsettling the neat narrative of human progress. If hunter-gatherers truly transformed into astronomers overnight, how did they achieve such precision without telescopes, without centuries of accumulated data? Was there, hidden beneath myth, a transfer of knowledge, one so profound that its origins had to be clothed in the language of gods and angels? The figure of Enoch, standing as both scribe and visionary, becomes the symbolic vessel of that transfer, the one who writes down the laws of heaven so that they will not be lost when the flood comes. But astronomy is not the only science veiled in his visions. Enoch also records secrets of weather and energy. He speaks of the storehouses of the winds, the chambers of hail, the pathways of thunder. To us, these may sound like fanciful metaphors, yet they reveal a sense that the natural world is governed by hidden reservoirs of force, released with purpose. Modern physics, in its own language, speaks of fields and particles, of energy stored and discharged. The imagery is different, but the intuition is the same. Nature is not chaos, but structure, and to know that structure is to touch power. Here lies the tension at the heart of the Book of Enoch. Knowledge is power, and power is peril. The Watchers gave humanity arts it was not ready for, and chaos followed. Enoch, by contrast, receives knowledge but holds it with reverence, recording it not for vanity, but for memory. He becomes the model of wisdom, to know without abusing, to see without consuming. His role forces us to ask ourselves whether we, in our own pursuit of knowledge, lean closer to the Watchers or to Enoch. The astronomical book also speaks of judgment written into the cosmos. Stars that stray from their appointed paths are punished, bound in darkness. The image is strange, but it reflects a profound intuition that even the heavens are accountable. In later traditions, fallen stars became symbols of fallen angels, comets and meteors read as omens of rebellion. To Enoch's audience, the message was clear. Order is sacred, and deviation brings consequences. The same message resounds in human life. Those who stray from justice, like the stars from their courses, will face judgment. The universe itself becomes a moral text, written not only in Scripture, but in the sky. And yet, there is beauty alongside the warning. Enoch describes visions of radiant mountains, rivers of fire, trees that shine with eternal fruit. His heavens are not only prisons and judgments, but also gardens of peace, sanctuaries of light. The righteous, he says, will one day dwell there, eating from the tree of life, walking in harmony with creation. In these passages, the Book of Enoch touches on hope as well as fear, on the dream that beyond the floods and punishments lies a world restored, a world where wisdom and justice are no longer fragile but secure. For later readers, these visions became seeds for entire traditions. The Book of Revelation, with its trees of life, its fiery rivers, its judgments written in the stars, echoes the language of Enoch. Early Christian mystics read Enoch and saw in him a forerunner of Christ, a prototype of ascension and judgment. Jewish mystics saw him as Metatron, the scribe of heaven. Muslim scholars honored him as Idris, lifted into the skies. Again and again, across faiths, Enoch's voice reappears, reshaped but never erased. What is it about him that refuses to vanish? Perhaps it is that he embodies the eternal human tension, the hunger for knowledge and the fear of its consequences. He is the one who walked with God, yet he is also the one who saw what angels saw. He is both man and almost more, both witness and participant. In him, humanity glimpses its own possibility, the chance to ascend, to know, to write the secrets of the cosmos. But in the shadow of that possibility lies the danger of falling, of becoming like the Watchers, undone by desire. The astronomical book, with its cycles and laws, reminds us that time itself is part of this story. The year repeats, the stars move, the seasons turn. History, too, repeats. Rebellion, judgment, renewal. Perhaps this is why Enoch insists on writing, on preserving, on leaving a record. He knows that memory is fragile, that floods erase, that civilizations fall. But words, if hidden, may survive, waiting to be uncovered in caves by shepherds who stumble upon them centuries later. His writing becomes an ark of its own, not of wood but of ink, carrying the seeds of memory across the waters of forgetting. And so, as we move deeper into his visions, we begin to sense that the Book of Enoch is less about the past than about the cycles that govern existence. It tells us that what has been will be again, that floods and falls are not only ancient but perpetual. It warns that knowledge, if taken without wisdom, always brings collapse. And it promises that even after collapse, fragments endure, waiting for those willing to listen. The deeper Enoch journeys, the more his visions take on a dual character. Part cosmic travelogue, part moral warning. He is shown the machinery of creation not for curiosity's sake, but to understand that the universe itself embodies justice. Every river of fire, every storehouse of thunder, every prison of stars is a reminder that nothing escapes accountability. To the modern reader, this can feel overwhelming, an entire cosmos organized around law and consequence. But perhaps that is precisely the point. In Enoch's world, existence is not neutral. It bends toward balance, and anything that disrupts it will one day be set right. One of the most striking passages describes the fate of souls after death. Enoch sees a great mountain with hollow places inside, divided into 4 compartments. In one, the righteous wait in light, destined for blessing. In another, the wicked wait in darkness, destined for torment. In a third, those not wholly righteous or wicked linger in uncertainty. And in the last, the spirits of the violent cry out for justice. Here we see an early vision of the afterlife, centuries before doctrines of heaven and hell took shape. It is not a simple binary, but a spectrum, reflecting the complexity of human lives. Judgment, in this view, is not immediate but delayed, awaiting a final reckoning when all accounts will be settled. This vision resonates with later beliefs across cultures. In Greek thought, souls traveled to Hades, where they were judged and sent to different realms, Elysium for the blessed, Tartarus for the wicked. In Egyptian lore, the heart of the deceased was weighed against the feather of truth, determining whether it would enter paradise or be devoured. In Christianity, heaven and hell become fixed destinations, but the imagery of light and darkness, of judgment delayed, echoes what Enoch described long before. Once again, his visions seem less like isolated inventions and more like roots feeding the branches of later traditions. But the text also confronts us with something darker: the origin of evil spirits. After the flood destroys the Nephilim, their bodies perish, but their spirits, Enoch says, remain on earth. They become restless, wandering, hungry, tormenting humanity. These are the demons, the unclean spirits that plague the living. It is a chilling genealogy. Rebellion breeds giants, giants breed violence, and their deaths breed spirits that cannot rest. Evil, in this view, is not a foreign intrusion, but a lingering presence, a residue of corruption that refuses to vanish. This idea profoundly shaped later demonologies. When the Gospels describe Jesus casting out unclean spirits, the echoes of Enoch are unmistakable. The notion that demons are disembodied souls of giants explains both their hostility and their craving for embodiment. They are fragments of a hybrid existence, denied both heaven and earth, condemned to wander until the final judgment. Here again, the Book of Enoch provides a framework that later traditions built upon, even if they did not acknowledge their source. Yet the text does not leave us in despair. Alongside the story of corruption and judgment, it offers visions of restoration. Enoch sees mountains melting like wax, rivers swelling with fire, stars trembling before the throne of glory. But he also sees a world renewed, a creation healed. The righteous will dwell in peace, eating from the tree of life, walking in harmony with the cosmos. It is a dream of justice fulfilled, not only in punishment, but in renewal. The earth itself, which cried out under the weight of corruption, will finally rest. This duality, destruction and renewal, is essential. Without judgment, corruption would spread unchecked. Without restoration, judgment would be meaningless. The Book of Enoch insists on both, that the world must be purged, but also that it will be made new. In this, it speaks not only to ancient fears, but to modern ones. For we, too, live with the sense that catastrophe is near. Rising seas, burning forests, collapsing systems. And yet we also cling to the hope that beyond the collapse lies renewal, that the earth can heal, that humanity can begin again. Enoch's visions also raise the unsettling question of hidden knowledge. He is told to write, to preserve, to pass on what he has seen, but he is also commanded to seal certain things, to withhold them until the appointed time. Not all knowledge, it seems, is meant for all ages. Some truths, if revealed too soon, would corrupt rather than enlighten. This motif appears again in later traditions. Daniel is told to seal his prophecy until the end. John in Revelation is told not to write what the seven thunders said. The idea recurs that there are mysteries too dangerous for premature disclosure. To modern minds, this may seem frustrating, even manipulative, but perhaps it reflects a deep intuition that humanity often grasps knowledge before it grasps wisdom, and that timing is as important as truth. We know this in our own age, when technologies arrive faster than our ethics can adapt, when discoveries outpace our ability to control them. In that sense, the sealed books of prophets are not arbitrary secrets, but warnings about our own limits. The persistence of those themes, floods, angels, giants, demons, sealed knowledge, suggests that the Book of Enoch is less a single text than a repository of archetypes. It gathers the fears and hopes of humanity, encodes them in visions, and passes them forward. Its survival, hidden in caves and fragments, mirrors its content. Truths sealed until a later age, waiting to be rediscovered when the time is right. That rediscovery in the 20th century, with the Dead Sea Scrolls, was itself an echo of the pattern. Knowledge hidden, knowledge revealed, knowledge tested. Again and again, the cycle continues. And so, as we stand at the edge of Enoch's visions, we find ourselves confronted not only with the mysteries of the past, but with choices of the present. Will we, like the Watchers, pursue knowledge without restraint, only to see it turn against us? Or will we, like Enoch, bear it with reverence, recording it not for pride but for memory, carrying it forward for the sake of renewal? The text offers no easy answer, only the haunting reminder that every gift carries its shadow, and every shadow carries the seed of judgment. Perhaps that is why the Book of Enoch, though excluded, persists. It is not comfortable reading. It does not fit neat doctrines or tidy categories. But it lingers, whispering across time that the world is stranger than we think, that our hunger for knowledge is as old as humanity itself, and that the flood, whether of water, fire, or silence, is never as far away as we imagine. By the time we reach the later sections of the Book of Enoch, a strange rhythm has taken hold. The visions alternate between scenes of terror and scenes of promise, as though reminding us that judgment and hope are inseparable. Enoch is shown valleys of fire where kings and mighty ones will one day be punished, their arrogance stripped away. He is also shown gardens of light where the righteous will flourish like trees beside streams of water. To him, history is not a straight line, but a landscape of contrasts. Valleys of darkness set against mountains of radiance, corruption shadowed by renewal. The theme of kings brought low is especially striking. Again and again, Enoch insists that rulers who abuse their power will not escape. Thrones may glitter, armies may conquer, palaces may rise. But in the end, those who built their strength on violence and injustice will be cast down. This is not merely a religious sentiment, but a radical critique of power itself. For the oppressed, it would have been a source of hope that the world was not fixed, that the mighty would not reign forever. For the powerful, it was dangerous, a subversive whisper that their empires were built on sand. Perhaps this, too, explains why the Book of Enoch was unwelcome to authorities. It questioned the permanence of power, placing all rulers under the gaze of a higher justice. But the text does not stop with kings. It extends judgment to the very structure of creation. Stars that stray are bound, waters that overwhelm are restrained, spirits that corrupt are imprisoned. Everything is accountable. The universe, in Enoch's visions, is not morally indifferent. It is alive with order, humming with laws, bending always toward justice. Even time itself is framed as a witness, with days and seasons recording the deeds of humanity. To live is to be seen, not only by God, but by the cosmos itself. This sense of cosmic accountability resonates with something deep in human consciousness. Across cultures, myths declare that nothing is hidden, that every action leaves a trace. In Egypt, the heart is weighed against truth. In Greece, the Furies pursue those who spill blood, even across generations. In India, karma ensures that no deed is lost, that cause and effect ripple through lifetimes. In Enoch, this intuition takes cosmic form. The heavens watch, the earth cries out, the stars themselves bear witness. It is a vision that erases the comfort of anonymity. To exist is to be known. Yet alongside judgment, Enoch speaks of mercy. The righteous, he says, will dwell in light, clothed in glory, their names remembered forever. They will eat from the tree of life, their joy unending. This dual vision, wrath for the wicked, blessing for the just, creates a tension that has shaped religious thought ever since. The fear of judgment and the hope of salvation are two sides of the same coin, inseparable in the human search for meaning. Without judgment, salvation is trivial. Without salvation, judgment is unbearable. Enoch holds both in balance, refusing to let us escape either. What makes these visions haunting is their concreteness. Enoch does not speak in vague abstractions. He names places, describes landscapes, gives measurements. He insists that he saw these things, that he walked among them, that he was guided by angels who explained what he did not understand. The reader is left unsettled. Is this poetry or testimony? Vision or memory? The line is thin, and perhaps deliberately so. For what is myth, if not memory clothed in symbol? And what is testimony, if not myth believed as history? The Book of Enoch also touches repeatedly on the theme of secrecy. He is told to write down what he sees, but also to conceal parts of it, to pass them only to the wise. Some knowledge, the angels warn, must not be given to the unprepared. This theme appears again in later traditions: hidden gospels, sealed scrolls, esoteric teachings reserved for the initiated. It reflects the tension between revelation and restraint, between the impulse to share and the fear of misuse. In our own age, this tension has not vanished. Scientific discoveries are often classified, guarded, withheld until deemed safe or useful. The debate over what should be known and who should know it is as old as humanity itself. And what of Enoch himself, the man at the center of it all? By this point in the text, he is less a character and more a conduit. His voice fades into the visions, his presence almost transparent. He becomes the archetypal scribe, the one who records but doesn't dominate, who sees but doesn't seize. In this, he is unlike the watchers, whose hunger corrupted them. He is a vessel, not a usurper. His humility is his strength, the reason he can ascend where angels fell. This, too, is part of the warning. Knowledge without pride leads upward. Knowledge with pride leads downward. It is easy to see why later traditions elevated him to near-divine status. In Jewish mysticism, Enoch becomes Metatron, the angel who records all deeds. In Islamic thought, Idris is honored as a prophet lifted into the heavens. In Christian imagination, he foreshadows Christ, the one who ascends and intercedes. Across faiths, he is remembered not for his power, but for his faithfulness, not for conquest, but for vision. His greatness lies not in what he did, but in what he saw, and in his willingness to bear that sight without corruption. For us, reading him now, the challenge remains the same. We live in an age of unprecedented knowledge, of visions once unthinkable. Galaxies mapped, genes sequenced, machines learning on their own. Like the ancients, we stand at the threshold of mysteries that could elevate or destroy us. The Book of Enoch whispers across the centuries that the danger is not the knowledge itself, but the spirit with which we receive it. Are we watchers, hungry for power? Or are we scribes, humble enough to record without exploiting? The answer may determine whether our story ends in flood or in renewal. Perhaps that is why the Book of Enoch still matters. It is not a relic of superstition, but a mirror of our present. It shows us the cycle of desire and downfall, of revelation and judgment, of loss and restoration. It reminds us that knowledge is always a gift wrapped in fire, and that to touch it without wisdom is to be burned. And it insists, with every vision, that the universe is not indifferent, that justice is woven into its fabric, that nothing escapes the gaze of the heavens. And so we are left with the same choice Enoch faced: to walk humbly with the mysteries we are given, or to reach greedily for what we cannot bear. The book offers no easy resolution, only the haunting reminder that floods come when boundaries are crossed, and that every flood is both an ending and a beginning. The deeper we listen to the cadence of Enoch's visions, the more it feels like he is less a prophet predicting distant events, and more a chronicler of cycles already woven into the fabric of existence. His words do not suggest that history moves in a straight line toward a final destination. Instead, they paint a world of repetition, rebellion, corruption, judgment, renewal, and then rebellion again. In this sense, the Book of Enoch is not simply about the ancient past, but about the recurring patterns of human life, the spirals of desire and downfall that repeat themselves across generations. One of the most haunting motifs is the idea of hidden watchers, beings who see us though we do not see them. Once, they were the angels who descended, luminous and terrible, crossing boundaries they were meant to guard. But even after their fall, their presence lingers, transformed into restless spirits. Humanity, in this vision, is never alone. We are surrounded, observed, entangled with unseen forces that shape our lives in ways we barely comprehend. The watchers may be bound, their children destroyed, yet their shadows continue to move in the world. This idea is unsettling because it suggests that corruption is not only within us, but also around us, that the battle for balance is both internal and external. The Book of Enoch also expands on the figure of the Son of Man, a mysterious presence who emerges in the parables section. Radiant, eternal, chosen before creation itself, he is portrayed as the agent of final judgment and the defender of the righteous. His throne is of glory, his authority cosmic. When early Christians read these passages, they recognized in them an uncanny foreshadowing of Christ. The title, Son of Man, used by Jesus more than any other, echoes directly from Enoch's pages. This raises unsettling questions. Did the writers of the Gospels borrow imagery from Enoch? Did the early church, while suppressing the book from the canon, nevertheless absorb its visions into the fabric of its theology? The irony is sharp. What was rejected officially may have survived indirectly, shaping the very faith that tried to silence it. In these parables, the Son of Man does more than judge. He reveals what is hidden, exposes what has been concealed, and restores balance to creation. This is more than retribution. It is unveiling. In a world where secrets fester, where the deeds of the mighty are cloaked, where injustice hides in shadows, the promise that nothing will remain hidden is profoundly subversive. It is not only comfort, but warning, that every secret, whether of kings or of ordinary men, will one day be revealed. Enoch insists that the cosmos itself will be the stage for this disclosure, as if creation cannot rest until truth is laid bare. We might dismiss this as apocalyptic drama, but it resonates with our own anxieties. We live in an age of surveillance, of hidden networks, of secrets uncovered by leaks and revelations. We sense that nothing can remain concealed forever, that truth has a way of rising like water through cracks. Enoch's vision is not so different. The idea that the universe bends toward exposure, that concealment is temporary, that all things are watched and will be judged. His watchers may be angels, ours may be algorithms, but the anxiety is the same, that unseen eyes are always upon us, and that our deeds will outlast our attempts to hide them. Equally striking is how Enoch portrays the earth itself as a witness. He hears the mountains crying, the rivers mourning, the stars trembling at the weight of corruption. Creation is not neutral in his visions. It is responsive, alive, bound up in the destiny of humanity. When violence spreads, the earth groans. When injustice rises, the cosmos tilts. This image, once myth, now finds echoes in modern science, climate change, deforestation, species extinction, all are signs that the earth reacts to imbalance, that our actions reverberate beyond us. What Enoch framed as myth, we now measure in data. Storms intensifying, seas rising, forests burning. The language differs, but the intuition is identical. The earth does not remain silent under corruption. In one passage, Enoch describes being shown the places where the spirits of the dead await. They are divided not only by moral deeds, but by the nature of their lives. Those slain unjustly, those who lived in righteousness, those who brought violence. It is as if the afterlife itself is structured to preserve memory, to ensure that injustice is not forgotten. The cries of the slain echo until judgment comes, demanding redress. This is not merely theology. It is the insistence that suffering leaves a mark on the fabric of existence, that no injustice vanishes into silence. For those who have lost, this is hope. For those who have harmed, it is terror. Enoch's own role remains paradoxical. He is a man, yet he is lifted beyond man. He is mortal, yet he sees immortality. He does not conquer or rule, yet he is given visions denied to kings. His greatness lies not in power, but in perception. In this sense, he represents a different model of wisdom, not domination, but witness, not control, but insight. The Watchers sought to dominate by giving knowledge recklessly. Enoch preserves by writing, by remembering, by mediating. His path is the opposite of theirs, and it is this difference that allows him to ascend where they fall. This duality, fallen angels and ascended man, creates a mirror. Humanity can choose either path. We can seize knowledge in hunger, or we can bear it in humility. We can corrupt, or we can preserve. The flood is the outcome of one path, the ascent of Enoch the promise of the other. This choice is not only ancient, but perpetual, faced by every generation, including ours. And so, the Book of Enoch lingers not because it offers neat doctrine, but because it refuses closure. It does not resolve its own paradoxes. It leaves them burning. Angels fall and men rise. Knowledge is gift and curse. Judgment destroys but also renews. The universe is terrifying in its order, but also radiant in its promise. We are left not with answers, but with the sense that we, too, stand in the same tension, that our story, like theirs, teeters on the edge between ascent and flood. This is why the Book of Enoch, though suppressed, resurfaces. It speaks not to dogma, but to the raw human experience of longing, fear, and wonder. It whispers that our hunger for knowledge is older than history, that our floods, whether of water, fire, or silence, are never far away, and that the figure of Enoch, quiet scribe turned visionary, still waits at the threshold, reminding us that the boundaries between heaven and earth are thinner than we dare to believe. As Enoch's visions move toward their culmination, we begin to sense a widening horizon. What began as the story of angels descending and corrupting the earth now stretches into a cosmic panorama where all of creation is implicated. He is shown not only the fate of the Watchers and their children, but the destinies of nations, the courses of kings, the rise and fall of ages. His role shifts from scribe of one generation to witness of all generations, a voice that speaks not only to his own time, but to every age that follows. One of the most profound passages introduces the concept of the weeks of history. Time, Enoch is told, is divided into symbolic weeks, each representing an era of human destiny. Across these weeks unfold patterns of rebellion, judgment, and renewal. In one, the flood, in another the giving of law, in another the building of a new temple. Toward the end, the righteous grow faint, corruption spreads once more, and the cosmos itself trembles. Finally, a week of judgment arrives, followed by a week of eternal renewal. This cyclical structure reinforces what we have already sensed, that history is not random, but patterned, that the rise and fall of civilizations are woven into the design of the universe. To later interpreters, this section was both tantalizing and dangerous. It suggested that history could be mapped, that the destiny of nations was written in advance. Such a vision could inspire hope in oppressed communities who could believe that their suffering was temporary, destined to be overturned. But it could also unsettle authorities who preferred to think of their empires as eternal. To suggest that Rome, or Babylon, or any kingdom would one day fall under judgment was a subversive act. Perhaps this is why the Book of Enoch was kept outside the canon, because it placed all human power under scrutiny, insisting that no throne is beyond the reach of justice. But beyond politics, the weeks offer something deeper, the sense that time itself is sacred, that history is not accidental but meaningful. For us today, this is both comforting and unsettling. We often think of history as chaos, driven by random forces, accidents, and human choices. But Enoch presents another possibility, that beneath the surface of events lies a hidden rhythm, a structure as real as the laws of physics. If so, then our own age, too, is part of a pattern larger than we can see. This sense of hidden design is reinforced by Enoch's repeated emphasis on writing. He is told to record everything, visions, laws, judgments, so that later generations may know. His role is not to act, but to preserve, not to rule, but to witness. Writing becomes his ark, carrying memory across the floods of forgetting. In this, the Book of Enoch reflects a profound truth, that civilization itself is built on memory, on the fragile act of recording what might otherwise vanish. Every scroll, every carving, every story told is a resistance against the erasure of time. Enoch embodies this resistance, becoming the archetype of the scribe whose pen preserves what the flood would otherwise destroy. And yet, even as he writes, he is warned that some knowledge must remain sealed. Not all truths are for all times. Some are too dangerous, too heavy to be borne. This paradox, reveal and conceal, haunts the text. It suggests that revelation is not a simple gift, but a responsibility. The timing is as important as truth. For us, this resonates with the dilemmas of modern science. Should we unlock technologies we cannot yet control? Should we share knowledge that could be misused? The tension between discovery and restraint is as ancient as Enoch, and as urgent as our own age of nuclear weapons and artificial intelligence. In his visions, Enoch is also shown the final fate of the Watchers. Bound beneath mountains, imprisoned in darkness, they await the day when they will be cast into fire. Their story, so full of arrogance and desire, ends not with triumph, but with chains. Yet even here, their presence lingers, for their children's spirits still wander, and their corruption still echoes in the world. Evil, once unleashed, cannot be fully erased until the final judgment. This bleak vision resonates with our own sense that violence and injustice, once sown, persist long after their origin. Wars end, but their scars endure. Empires fall, but their legacies shape the future. In this sense, The Watchers are not only mythic beings but symbols of the long shadow of corruption across history. Yet Enoch is also shown a world beyond judgment, a creation renewed. In his visions, the earth is remade, the righteous shine like light, the nations dwell in peace, the tree of life once more offers its fruit. Here, the cycle of fall and renewal reaches its climax, the promise that beyond the floods and fires, creation itself will be healed. This vision is not mere consolation. It is the anchor of hope, the assurance that destruction is not the final word. For every age that has faced despair, these passages have offered the reminder that history bends not only toward judgment, but also toward restoration. The Book of Enoch thus oscillates between terror and hope, between valleys of fire and gardens of light. It does not allow us to settle in despair nor in complacency. Instead, it forces us to live in tension, aware of both the danger of corruption and the promise of renewal. This tension is uncomfortable, but it may also be truer to the human condition than neat doctrines. We, too, live in a world of both peril and promise, where collapse and restoration are always entwined. And so, as the visions unfold, we begin to see why this book, though excluded, has endured. It speaks to the deepest human questions. What is the meaning of history? Why do civilizations rise and fall? Is justice real, or is it illusion? Can knowledge save us, or will it destroy us? These are not questions confined to the past. They are as urgent now as they were in the caves of Qumran, in the halls of Babylon, in the deserts of Ethiopia. Perhaps this is the greatest legacy of Enoch, not that he gives us answers, but that he preserves the questions. He forces us to confront the paradoxes we would rather avoid, that knowledge is both gift and curse, that power both builds and corrupts, that judgment both destroys and renews. His visions remain unfinished, open, waiting for each generation to read them anew and see themselves reflected in their fire and light. As the scroll of Enoch winds further, its language begins to feel less like isolated visions and more like a grand orchestration, a universe layered with laws, mysteries, and inevitabilities. What started with the descent of the Watchers has now widened into a sweeping panorama of all creation, a map of destinies unfolding under the gaze of unseen forces. And in this expansion, we sense the central paradox, that humanity, fragile and fleeting, stands somehow at the heart of it all. One of the themes that now grows louder is the unveiling of hidden books. Enoch is told that what he writes will outlast him, preserved for generations to come, sealed until the time when it will be needed most. This is a strange image, the idea that truth can be stored like grain in a granary, locked away until famine strikes. The text itself becomes part of its prophecy. A book hidden in caves, forgotten for centuries, rediscovered in the deserts of Qumran. The very survival of Enoch mirrors its message, as though the act of being forgotten and remembered was always part of the plan. Knowledge, it suggests, moves in cycles too, concealed and revealed according to the readiness of those who receive it. In this, we hear an echo of other traditions. Daniel, centuries later, is told to seal his book until the end of days. John, in Revelation, is commanded not to write what the seven thunders have spoken. Again and again, the motif recurs: secrets withheld, mysteries reserved. It suggests that truth is not only a matter of content, but of timing. that some knowledge can only be born in its season. This, perhaps, is one of the most sobering lessons of Enoch. That wisdom is not measured by how much we know, but by whether we are ready for what we know. At the same time, the visions continue to return to the earth itself. Mountains quake, oceans swell, stars shift. Creation is not passive in Enoch's account. It reacts, mourns, cries out. The violence of the giants becomes not only a human problem, but a cosmic imbalance. When injustice spreads, the very fabric of creation trembles. This resonates uncannily with our own time, where the earth responds visibly to human excess, rising seas, burning forests, shifting climates. We speak in terms of science. Enoch spoke in terms of myth, but the intuition is the same. Imbalance in human life leads to imbalance in the world itself. The persistence of the giants, too, becomes symbolic here. Though their bodies are destroyed by the flood, their spirits linger, restless, tormenting the living. This is more than demonology. It is metaphor for the way corruption outlasts its source. Violence leaves legacies. Injustice ripples across generations. Even when wars end, their shadows remain. The Nephilim, then, are not only ancient monsters, but symbols of the residues of evil that never truly vanish, that linger until something greater than human power finally brings them to rest. But amidst these shadows, the visions of hope grow brighter. Enoch is shown not only judgment, but restoration. He sees a time when the righteous will dwell in light, when creation itself will be renewed, when the tree of life will once more bear fruit for all. This vision anticipates what later scriptures will call the new heaven and new earth, the final renewal where sorrow and corruption are no more. It is a reminder that destruction is never the last word. Beyond the flood lies dry ground. Beyond the fire lies light. For early readers, this hope was more than theological. It was survival. To live under empires that crushed the weak, to endure exile and oppression, to see temples fall and cities burn, what sustained them was the belief that history bends not only toward judgment, but toward renewal. Enoch's visions gave voice to this hope, embedding it in cosmic imagery so vast that no empire could erase it. Even if kings silenced prophets, the stars themselves testified to the promise that justice would come. And yet there is also unease in these promises. The renewal is not for all. The wicked are excluded, the corrupt destroyed. Enoch's vision does not offer universal reconciliation, but division, the righteous lifted, the wicked cast down. This raises questions that trouble us still. Can justice be complete if it excludes? Can hope be hope if it leaves others in despair? The text doesn't resolve these questions. It insists only that corruption cannot endure forever, that the scales must one day be balanced, even if the cost is exclusion. This harshness is part of what makes Enoch unsettling. It refuses sentimentality. It speaks of a justice that is sharp, uncompromising, unyielding. Perhaps this is why the book has always existed at the margins. Too radical for easy acceptance, too uncompromising for neat theology. It insists on both mercy and wrath, both hope and terror, both revelation and concealment. It does not let us rest in simple answers. It presses us into the tension, forcing us to confront the paradoxes we would rather avoid. Enoch himself, by this point, is almost absent as a character. He has become more scribe than man, more witness than participant. His identity dissolves into the visions he records, as though he has become a channel rather than a person. And perhaps that is fitting. For the figure of Enoch is not meant to dominate, but to disappear into the message, to be less hero than mirror. He is not conqueror or king, but a reminder that greatness lies not in ruling, but in seeing, not in seizing, but in remembering. As the text unfolds, we begin to sense that its real subject is not angels or giants, or even floods. It is humanity itself. Our hunger for knowledge, our capacity for corruption, our longing for justice, our fear of judgment, our hope for renewal. The Book of Enoch, for all its strangeness, is about us. It is our story, written in the language of myth, preserved against forgetting, rediscovered when the time is ripe. It is a mirror, showing us what we are and what we might become, what we have endured and what we may yet face. And perhaps this is why it continues to speak even now. We too live in an age of forbidden knowledge, splitting atoms, altering genomes, teaching machines to think. We too stand at the edge of floods, not of water, perhaps, but of fire, of collapse, of silence. We too feel the weight of being watched, whether by powers above or by systems of our own making. Enoch's visions are not relics, they are reminders. They whisper across millennia that the story of the Watchers is our story, that the choice between ascent and fall is always before us, and that the flood is never only behind us but always ahead. As the visions draw near their end, the figure of Enoch seems to fade into something larger, as though the man himself dissolves into the vast canvas of creation he has been allowed to see. His words are less about his own journey now, and more about the destiny of the cosmos itself. What began with the fall of angels and the corruption of earth has widened into a story of all history, all nations, all ages, culminating in judgment and renewal. The Book of Enoch is not merely the tale of one prophet's visions, it is the attempt to describe nothing less than the architecture of reality. Among the most striking elements of these later passages is the repeated insistence that nothing is hidden forever. Deeds done in darkness will be revealed, secrets will be exposed, every action will be weighed. This is not framed as divine intrusion, but as natural consequence, as if truth itself is woven into the fabric of the cosmos. The Watchers thought they could escape by descending to earth, hiding their rebellion in secret unions. Kings thought they could bury their violence beneath monuments. Yet Enoch insists that nothing remains concealed. Time itself is a revealer, and the cosmos is a witness. For a people who lived under oppression, this was hope, that the arrogance of the powerful would one day collapse under the sheer weight of truth. For those who ruled, it was a threat too dangerous to canonize. The visions also return to the imagery of cosmic upheaval, stars trembling, mountains melting, oceans surging. It is not only human society that is judged, but the cosmos itself, shaken to its foundations so that justice can be restored. This imagery, terrifying and majestic, anticipates what later apocalyptic texts would echo: the darkened sun, the falling stars, the collapsing heavens. We may be tempted to dismiss it as mythic exaggeration, but it speaks to a deeper intuition, that when corruption reaches a certain point, the balance of the entire system is disturbed. For us, this intuition resonates with the language of ecological collapse. When imbalance grows too great, the world itself convulses. The ancients described it in visions of stars and fire. We measure it in rising temperatures and shifting climates. Yet the intuition is the same. Corruption cannot endure without consequence. One of the most mysterious elements of Enoch's later visions is his description of a renewed earth. He sees a land transformed, where the righteous shine like light, where the tree of life flourishes once more, where sorrow and injustice are no more. It is not only humanity that is restored, but creation itself. The curse of corruption is lifted, and the world becomes what it was always meant to be. This vision has inspired generations, feeding into later texts that speak of a new heaven and new earth, of paradise restored. It is a reminder that judgment, however terrible, is never the final word. Beyond fire lies light, beyond flood lies dry ground, beyond destruction lies renewal. But this renewal is not universal. The wicked are excluded, their names erased, their places forgotten. This harsh division forces us into uncomfortable questions. Can hope be complete if it excludes? Can justice be fulfilled if it destroys rather than reconciles? The Book of Enoch offers no easy resolution. Its vision is sharp, uncompromising. Corruption must be purged or creation cannot heal. To modern readers, this can feel harsh, but perhaps that is its power. It refuses to sentimentalize, to soften. It insists that justice, if it is to be real, must cut deep, must burn away what corrupts, even if the cost is terrible. Enoch's role by now is almost spectral. He is the scribe, the mediator, the one who has seen. He does not act, he records. He does not conquer, he remembers. In this, he is the opposite of the watchers. They crossed boundaries to seize, he crosses boundaries to witness. They gave knowledge for pride, he preserves knowledge for memory. Their end is chains, his is ascent. This contrast is the moral axis of the entire book. Knowledge without humility leads downward. Knowledge with humility leads upward. It is a paradox as old as humanity, and as urgent now as ever. And perhaps this is why Enoch's story refuses to vanish. Across traditions, he is remembered under many names: Idris, Thoth, Hermes, Metatron. Each culture reshaped him, but the silhouette remained the same. The man who walked with God, who saw visions, who ascended without death. It is as though humanity cannot bear to forget him, as though he embodies something essential about our own condition. We too are creatures who hunger for knowledge, who stand on the edge of flood and fire, who long for ascent but fear the fall. Enoch is the archetype of that tension, the mirror of our own restless longing. As we reflect on these visions, one theme becomes inescapable: the cycle. Rebellion, corruption, judgment, renewal, then again rebellion. The flood was not the last, it was the prototype. Each generation faces its own flood, its own fall, its own chance for renewal. For us, the flood may not be water, but fire, not giants, but technologies, not watchers, but ourselves. The Book of Enoch whispers that we are not exempt from the cycle, that the choices of the ancients are the choices of today, that the line between ascent and fall is as thin as ever. And so, as the visions near their close, we are left with a haunting impression. The Book of Enoch is not about the past, but about the structure of existence. It is less a history than a mirror, less a prophecy than a warning. It tells us that the cosmos itself bends toward justice, that knowledge is never neutral, that creation remembers what we would rather forget. It forces us to confront the paradoxes we try to avoid, that destruction and renewal are inseparable, that hope is forged in judgment, that knowledge both elevates and destroys. This is why the book, though excluded, endures. It is not safe. It is not comfortable, but it is necessary. It speaks to something primal, something we know but rarely admit, that our hunger for knowledge is dangerous, that our power is fragile, that our world is always one step from flood. And it reminds us that even when floods come, memory survives, carried forward by those willing to write, to witness, to preserve. Enoch is the model of such a scribe, and his book, hidden for centuries, is itself the proof that memory endures. At the end of the Book of Enoch, we are left not with neat resolution, but with reverberations. The visions stop, the scribe vanishes, the scroll closes, but the questions remain, haunting, unresolved, echoing into the silence. Perhaps that is the true power of this text, not that it answers, but that it unsettles, not that it explains, but that it refuses to let us rest. We began with angels descending in rebellion and end with a cosmos remade, but the journey in between leaves us changed, more aware of the fragility of knowledge, the weight of memory, and the cycles that shape existence. Enoch himself disappears from history as abruptly as he entered it. In Genesis, he is but a shadow. He walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. In this book, he is expanded into a figure of vast significance, a man lifted beyond mortality, a witness to heaven and earth alike. But even here, he vanishes at the threshold. He does not linger to explain his own fate. He leaves us only his writings, his visions, his memories preserved for generations that were not yet born. In this, he becomes less a person than a symbol of memory against forgetting, of humility against pride, of wisdom against corruption. The flood that once loomed in his visions has long since receded. Cities have risen and fallen, empires come and gone. Yet the pattern remains, repeating across ages: rebellion, corruption, judgment, renewal, always the same cycle, always the same choice before humanity, to bear knowledge with reverence or to seize it in pride. In our own time, we face floods of a different kind: technological, ecological, existential. The ancients clothed their fears in myths of giants and angels. We clothe ours in language of data and climate and machines. But beneath the surface, the rhythm is the same. We too are watched. We too are weighed. We too must choose. The Book of Enoch does not comfort us with promises of safety. It tells us plainly that corruption brings collapse, that power without wisdom breeds destruction. But it also tells us that memory survives, that fragments endure, that renewal is possible. Its very survival, hidden in caves, forgotten for centuries, rediscovered in our own age, is itself a parable of resilience. What is meant to endure will endure, even against floods of forgetting. Knowledge may be sealed for a time, but it will return when the season is ripe. Enoch's book is proof of that truth, a living testament that memory can outlast erasure. And so we are left with the central paradox. Knowledge is both gift and curse. It elevates and destroys. It brings light and casts shadows. The watchers gave it recklessly and fell. Enoch received it humbly and ascended. Which path we follow is not determined by the knowledge itself, but by the spirit in which we hold it. This is the timeless warning, that wisdom is not in knowing, but in how we bear what we know. Perhaps this is why the book, though excluded, continues to speak. It was silenced by councils, ignored by theologians, forgotten by history. Yet it returned, emerging from desert caves into modern light, whispering across millennia that the questions it raised were never resolved. Its endurance is itself a message, that some truths cannot be buried, that memory has its own resilience, that stories carry themselves across ages to those willing to listen. The final image is not one of despair, but of possibility. The righteous shining, the earth renewed, the tree of life flourishing once more. It is a dream as old as humanity, that beyond collapse lies restoration, that justice is not illusion, that hope can be carved even from judgment. For all its terrors, the Book of Enoch ends with light, with the vision of a world healed. Whether we believe this literally or symbolically, it lingers as promise, that floods are not final, that memory endures, that renewal is always possible. And so we close the book, but it doesn't close on us. Its images stay, giants striding across the land, angels bound beneath mountains, rivers of fire, gardens of light, a scribe lifted into heaven. They return in dreams, in echoes, in questions we cannot silence. They remind us that history is not only what happened, but what is remembered, not only what is written, but what survives. The Book of Enoch has survived, and in its survival, it calls us to remember not only the past, but the cycles that shape our present. We may never know whether Enoch truly saw what he claimed, whether his visions were dreams or revelations, memories or myths. But perhaps that is not the point. The point is that his story persists, that his questions endure, that his visions mirror our own struggles. He is less a man of the past than a figure for all time, a reminder that humanity has always stood between ascent and fall, between wisdom and pride, between flood and renewal. And so we, too, are left at the threshold. The flood is behind us, but it is also ahead. The watchers are bound, but their shadows remain. Knowledge is before us, radiant and dangerous, waiting to be used with wisdom or with hunger. The Book of Enoch leaves us no easy answers, only the haunting reminder that every generation writes its own chapter in the same cycle. The question is whether we will remember, or whether we too will forget until judgment comes again. In the end, Enoch's voice is not a relic, but a whisper to the present. Walk humbly. Bear knowledge wisely. Remember what floods can erase. For the boundaries between heaven and earth are thinner than we think, and the choices we make echo further than we can imagine.